They say every photograph captures a moment, but this one captured a place that shouldn't exist. When Claire developed the old film roll she found in her grandfather's attic, she expected faded memories, not a hotel that no one remembers building. The lights inside were still on, the doors slightly open, and at the window, someone was watching her. Now, every time she looks at the photo, the hotel seems closer. And if she looks too long, she swears she can hear the lobby phone ringing. The day Thomas Graves arrived at the coastal town was shrouded in a dense, clammy mist that clung to the shoreline like a shroud. The air was thick with the briny tang of the sea, sharp and biting against his skin as he stepped off the train onto the creaking wooden platform. His boots made soft thuds on the weathered planks, soaked by the morning drizzle, while overhead, gulls called out plaintively, their cries carried away by the cold breeze. Ahead, the landscape stretched out bleak and windswept, dominated by the crumbling silhouette of a grand but decrepit hotel perched precariously at the edge of the cliffs. Its peeling paint and broken windows seemed almost spectral in the grey light, a ghostly sentinel watching over the town. Thomas paused for a moment, pulling his coat tighter around him as he took in the sight. This was the place, the locus of whispered stories and unsolved mysteries that had drawn him here. In his satchel lay a folder thick with photographs, each one a haunting testament to lives vanished without a trace. Yet in every single image, no matter how mundane or hurried, that same faded hotel appeared in the background, as if standing watch over the final moments of the missing. His first stop was a small cafe tucked away on a narrow street lined with weather-beaten shops. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of stale coffee and damp wood, mingled with the faint aroma of sea salt. The few patrons glanced up briefly before returning to their hushed conversations, their eyes wary and guarded. Thomas settled at a corner table, laying out his collection of photographs one by one under the dim glow of an oil lamp. The images, some blurred, others starkly clear, each bore the unmistakable outline of the hotel, looming silently behind families, friends, and strangers who had since disappeared. "You see it, don't you?" he murmured to himself, tracing the edges of a particularly faded photo. Always there, always watching. A waitress approached hesitantly, her eyes flickering to the pictures before she quickly averted her gaze. "Best not to ask about that place," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's been empty for years. Folks round here don't like to talk about it." Thomas nodded, sensing the weight of fear beneath her words. Determined, he ventured further, speaking with shopkeepers and fishermen, but each inquiry was met with reticence or subtle warnings. One elderly man muttered about curses and bad luck, while another hurried away when Thomas pressed him too hard. The hotel's shadow stretched long over the town, a silent reminder of secrets best left undisturbed. As the afternoon waned, Thomas wandered toward the cliffs, where the wind whipped fiercely, carrying with it the distant roar of the restless sea. The sky was a brooding slate, the sun a pale smudge behind thick clouds. From this vantage point, the hotel stood stark against the horizon, its broken facade fading into the encroaching mist. It was as though the building itself breathed, exhaling a chill that seeped into the bones. He took out his camera, raising it carefully to his eye. The lens captured the decaying grandeur of the hotel, the way the fog clung to its corners like a veil. He snapped a series of photographs, each one a record, a testament to the eerie presence that seemed to haunt every frame of the missing. His fingers trembled slightly as he lowered the camera, heart pounding with a mixture of dread and determination. Night fell quickly over the town, and Thomas found lodging at a modest inn, its creaky floorboards and faded wallpaper echoing the wariness of the place. Alone in his room, he spread out the photographs once more, the hotel's ghostly outlines weaving a silent story of loss and despair. Sleep eluded him as shadows danced across the walls, and in the distance, the relentless crash of waves against jagged rocks whispered of secrets buried deep beneath the surface. This was only the beginning. The hotel at the end of the photograph had called him, and Thomas Graves was ready to answer no matter the cost. The overcast sky hung low over the coastal town as Thomas Graves stepped off the bus, the salty tang of sea air mingling with an undercurrent of something older, something unspoken. His boots crunched on the cobblestone pavement of the narrow streets, worn smooth by time and tide. A faded poster fluttered against a lamppost, its edges curling, announcing a long-forgotten festival. Thomas adjusted the strap of his weathered satchel, pulling from it a small, battered notebook and a camera, the tools of his trade and his obsession. His first stop was a small cafe on the edge of the harbor, its windows steamed from the warmth inside. The few patrons glanced his way with wary eyes, their conversations falling silent as he entered. Thomas approached the counter, where a middle-aged woman with tired eyes served coffee with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm looking into the disappearances," Thomas said quietly, watching for her reaction. "People who've gone missing over the years." She stiffened, a shadow crossing her face. "Best not to pry, mister. This town's got its secrets, and some things are better left alone." Thomas nodded, undeterred. He showed her a photograph, a young man standing on the pier with the pale outline of a derelict hotel looming in the background. "You see that place? The hotel." The woman's gaze flickered to the window as if expecting the building itself to appear in the street. "Aye," she whispered. "That place. It's cursed, some say." Leaving the cafe, Thomas's footsteps echoed down the empty streets as he followed the path that led to the town library. The building was a squat stone structure, its fire-aid weather-beaten but dignified. Inside, the air smelled of aged paper and dust, a sanctuary for forgotten stories. At a cluttered desk sat Evelyn Marsh, her glasses perched low on her nose as she sorted through a stack of brittle documents. "Meh. Graves," she greeted, her voice soft but firm. "I've heard of your inquiry." Thomas returned the greeting, explaining his theory about the hotel's connection to the disappearances. Evelyn's eyes darkened, reflecting a mix of sorrow and caution. "The hotel has been a blight on this town for decades," she said. "It's more than just an abandoned building. It's tied to memories, lost souls tethered by tragedy and despair." She handed Thomas a faded photograph, edges frayed, depicting the hotel in its prime, bustling with life. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, his posture heavy with sorrow. "That man was the owner," Evelyn continued. "His despair after a terrible loss cursed the place. Ever since, the hotel has been a beacon for those who are lost, pulling them into its grasp." Thomas's gaze lingered on the image, the weight of her words settling deep within him. As he left the library, the evening mist had begun to creep over the town, shrouding the streets in a ghostly veil. He overheard snippets of hushed conversations, warnings, and half-truths that seemed to circle around the hotel like a dark tide. Later, in the quiet solitude of his rented room, Thomas spread out the photographs. He had collected, each one a silent testament to the vanished. The hotel stood on the horizon in every image, a faded, spectral presence that refused to be ignored. His fingers trembled as he pressed the shutter on his camera, capturing the view from his window. The crumbling silhouette of the hotel bathed in the pale light of the setting sun. The deeper Thomas dug, the more the lines between past and present began to blur. The locals' fear was palpable, a heavy fog that threatened to smother the truth. And somewhere, beyond the edges of reality, the hotel waited, patient, watchful, and hungry. As Thomas closed his eyes that night, the whisper of the sea mingled with voices just beyond hearing, calling him back to the shadows where lost souls lingered. And the photograph's faded hotel promised that the story was far from over. The hotel's silhouette haunted his dreams, a silent sentinel at the edge of a mystery that was growing darker with every whispered secret. And Thomas knew that to uncover the truth, he would have to confront not only the town's secrets, but the shadows within himself. What lay beyond the veil was uncertain, but the photograph had already begun its silent pull. With dawn still hours away, Thomas opened his notebook and began to write, the scratch of his pen a fragile tether to a reality that was slipping fast. The whispers among the locals were only the beginning. The hotel's story was just unfolding, and he was caught in its haunting embrace. Thomas Graves sat hunched over a cluttered wooden table in the town library, the faint glow of a single desk lamp illuminating the yellowed pages before him. The musty scent of old paper and dust hung thick in the air, mingling with the distant, rhythmic crash of waves against the rocky shore. Around him, the quiet murmur of turning pages and soft footsteps was punctuated only by the occasional creak of the ancient building settling. Evelyn Marsh stood a few feet away, her fingers lightly tracing the spines of books on a nearby shelf. Her eyes, magnified slightly by the lenses of her glasses, watched Thomas with a mixture of sympathy and unease. She had warned him that deeper he dug, the darker the truths he would uncover, but Thomas's determination was unshakable. "Look at this," Thomas murmured, tapping a brittle newspaper clipping. The headline, faded but still legible, read, "Tragedy at the Seaside Hotel, owner found dead." Beneath the headline was a grainy photograph of the hotel itself, standing resolute on the cliff's edge, its once grand facade weathered but unmistakably proud. Evelyn leaned closer, her voice low and cautious. That was nearly 50 years ago. The hotel shut down shortly after. The owner, Arthur Pendry, was found in his room. No one truly knows what happened to him. Thomas's fingers hesitated over the text. It says here he was discovered by the staff, apparently in a state of despair, with no signs of foul play. But the circumstances remain a mystery. "The town has always whispered about it," Evelyn said, her gaze drifting toward the window, where the outline of the hotel was barely visible through the morning mist. "Some say his grief cursed the place. Others think it's haunted by those who vanished over the years." Thomas felt a chill as he glanced up toward the distant silhouette of the hotel. The building loomed like a ghostly sentinel, shrouded in fog that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. He returned to the papers, uncovering more stories of disappearances dating back decades, each victim's final moments tied, somehow, to the hotel. As he flipped through a tattered photo album, Thomas's heart quickened. One black and white image caught his eye, a group of guests smiling on the hotel's sunlit terrace, unaware of the dark fate that awaited the place and its visitors. The contrast between the jovial scene and the desolation that now surrounded the building struck him with a painful nostalgia. "Do you think the hotel itself holds the souls of the missing?" Thomas whispered, almost afraid to voice the thought. Evelyn nodded slowly. "That's what the old legends suggest. They say it's a place caught between times, neither fully alive nor entirely dead. A prison for those lost to its curse." The room seemed to grow colder, the shadows deepening as Thomas absorbed the weight of her words. The past was not merely history. It was a living presence, a spectral echo that reached out from the faded photographs and whispered through the corridors of memory. Hours passed unnoticed as Thomas and Evelyn sifted through more documents, piecing together fragments of a story that stretched across generations. Each discovery drew him further into a web of despair and longing, one that threatened to consume him as it had so many before. When Thomas finally stepped outside, the sky was tinged with the pale hues of dawn. The hotel stood silent and foreboding on the horizon, its windows like dark eyes watching him. He pulled his coat tighter against the chill and took a photograph, a habit he had developed, compelled to capture every angle, every shadow. As the shutter clicked, a sudden gust of wind swept the mist across the shore, curling and twisting like fingers reaching out to grasp him. Thomas felt a shiver run down his spine, a whisper of something unseen brushing past his ear. He stared back at the hotel, a knot of dread tightening in his chest. The past was not dead, it was waiting, watching, and hungry. And Thomas Graves was now part of its story. The echoes of the past had begun to claim him. The chill of the coastal evening did little to deter Thomas Graves as he found himself once drawn toward the decrepit silhouette of the hotel perched like a forgotten relic against the horizon. The salt-laden wind tugged at his coat, carrying with it the distant crash of waves and a whisper so faint he questioned if it had passed through the howling gust or the corners of his own fractured mind. He raised his camera, fingers trembling slightly with a mixture of cold and something deeper, something unnamable that clung to the edges of his thoughts like a shadow he could neither shake nor fully understand. Through the lens, the hotel appeared simultaneously solid and spectral. Its weather-beaten facade seemed to shimmer in the fading light, the peeling paint and shattered windows distorting like a mirage. Thomas clicked the shutter repeatedly, each frame capturing not just the building, but something lurking just beyond perception. In some photographs, faint shapes wavered among the broken window panes, unaccountable blurs that refused explanation. Others revealed fleeting outlines of figures standing at the periphery, vanishing as soon as the camera's flash faded. Back in the cramped confines of his rented room above the town's solitary pub, Thomas spread his photographs across the wooden table, the yellowed light of a single lamp casting long shadows. He examined each image with increasing intensity, his breath caught in his throat as he noticed what his eyes had missed in the field. There amid the decay were faces twisted, mournful, trapped behind the glass like ghosts imprisoned in the frames themselves. His pulse quickened. The sensation was less of discovery and more of intrusion, as though he had stumbled through a veil best left untouched. The line between observer and participant blurred. Thomas's mind, already frayed by sleepless nights and the weight of his own past losses, began to fray further. His thoughts circled endlessly like restless tides, dragging him deeper into the hotel's spectral pull. His camera became both shield and tether, a way to capture, and perhaps contain the creeping horror that stalked the edges of his vision. One afternoon, seeking a moment of respite, Thomas found himself seated in the dim quiet of the town library. The scent of old paper and dust was comforting, yet beneath it lay something heavier, a history soaked in silence and unspoken dread. Evelyn Marsh, the librarian and local historian, moved among the stacks with a cautious grace, her eyes sharp beneath the rim of her glasses. She glanced at Thomas with a mixture of sympathy and warning. "This hotel," she began carefully, her voice low as if afraid of being overheard, "it's more than just an abandoned building. It's a wound in the town's history, a place where memories twist and linger, and sometimes they don't let go." Thomas leaned in, eager for any insight. "Do you think the disappearances are connected to it?" Evelyn hesitated, a flicker of fear shadowing her gaze. "Some here believe the hotel feeds on those who look back too long or too hard. Nostalgia can be a dangerous thing, especially when it's tangled with loss and regret." Her words echoed in Thomas's mind long after he left the library. He knew the path he was on was perilous, but the need for answers gnawed at him relentlessly. As dusk settled once more, he returned to the hotel's edge, the crumbling structure looming like a sentinel against the darkening sky. The wind had dropped, replaced by a thickening stillness that pressed against his skin. Thomas's footsteps crunched on the gravel as he drew closer, the air growing dense and cold. A shadow flickered across the broken windows, too quick to be a trick of the light. His breath caught in his throat as the building seemed to exhale a sigh of ancient sorrow. Suddenly a whisper, barely audible, curled around him. It was not a voice, but a breath, a fragment of a memory lost to time. Thomas stood frozen, the line between the living world and the spectral realm thinning to a fragile thread. The hotel was no longer just a backdrop to tragedy, it was a living presence, watching, waiting, and pulling him inexorably into its haunted embrace. Despite the fear that gripped him, Thomas raised his camera once again, determined to capture the truth, even if it meant confronting the darkness within and without. The photograph he took that night would later reveal more than just the dilapidated walls. It would show the first unmistakable hint that the hotel was reaching out not just to him, but to all those lost souls forever entwined in its cursed imagery. As he turned away from the building, the whispers faded into the night, but the cold lingered, a reminder that some mysteries are more than mere stories. They are echoes of pain, shadows of the past, and the first tremors of an obsession that would soon consume him entirely. The hotel waited silently, its windows like eyes reflecting 1,000 vanished lives. And Thomas Graves, drawn by the whispering depths of nostalgia and despair, was beginning to understand that some places are best left unseen. Yet the pull was too strong, too haunting to resist. The night closed around him as he walked back toward the town. The image of the hotel burned into his mind like a spectral brand. Somewhere deep inside, a question gnawed relentlessly. Was he simply a witness, or was he becoming the next lost soul drawn into the hotel's endless photograph? The answer, he feared, would soon come with a cruel and unyielding clarity. And with that thought, the darkness swallowed the light, leaving only the echo of a whisper and the faintest silhouette of a building at the end of a photograph. The morning air was thick with the salty tang of the sea as Thomas Graves pushed open the heavy door of the town library. The aged hinges creaked a reluctant greeting, and the scent of yellowed pages and dust enveloped him like an old, familiar cloak. Here, amid the quiet rows of books and forgotten records, he hoped to find the clues that had eluded him so far. The hotel's faded silhouette haunted every missing person's photograph, but the town itself seemed locked in silence around it, a silence he was determined to break. Evelyn Marsh was waiting amid the stacks, her glasses perched low on her nose as she leafed through a brittle volume. Her presence was at once reassuring and unsettling. She carried the weight of the town's secrets in her wary eyes. "Thomas," she greeted quietly, closing the book with a soft thud. "I hope you understand what you were getting into. Some things are best left buried." He looked at her steadily, sensing the tremor beneath her composed exterior. "I need to know, Evelyn. The disappearances, the hotel, there has to be a connection." She sighed, folding her hands over the book. "There is, but it's a dangerous path. This town has long been haunted not just by ghosts, but by fear itself. The hotel isn't just an old building, it's a wound that never healed." Thomas nodded, his fingers tightening around his notebook. "Have you seen the photographs? Everyone has that hotel in the background. It's like it's watching, waiting." "Exactly," Evelyn whispered. "And the more you look, the more it pulls you in. People have vanished chasing the truth, some never come back." Her warning lingered in the air as the library's ancient clock chimed softly, marking the passage of time as if it too felt the weight of the past. Later, stepping out into the chill afternoon, Thomas nearly collided with Detective Mark Halstead, who eyed him with a mixture of suspicion and frustration. "You re-stirring up old ghosts, Graves," Halstead said bluntly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "This town's had enough of chasing shadows." Thomas met Detective's gaze as unflinching. "I'm not chasing shadows, Detective. I'm chasing facts, disappearances, photographs, witnesses. There's something here that needs explaining." Halstead shook his head, a tight line forming at his mouth. "Facts don't come wrapped in ghost stories. You want answers. Stick to what can be proven. Leave the rest alone for your own good." The exchange was a stark reminder of the gulf between them, Thomas's growing belief in the supernatural clashing with Halstead's steadfast pragmatism. Yet, beneath the detective's skepticism, Thomas sensed a flicker of unease, a silent acknowledgement that the hotel's shadow cast longer than mere legend. That evening, the three met at a modest seaside cafe, the fading light casting long shadows through the windows. Evelyn's voice was low and urgent, Halstead's expression tight with disbelief, and Thomas caught between their opposing worlds. "The hotel's history is stained with tragedy," Evelyn said, eyes flickering with old pain. "Its owner lost everything: family, sanity. The curse began then, and it feeds on those who look back too long." Halstead scoffed quietly. "Curse or not, people vanish because of real reasons: running away, accidents, foul play. We can't let superstition cloud the investigation." Thomas leaned forward, voice steady but intense. Sometimes the truth lies between what's seen and unseen. We can't ignore the pattern. The photographs, the disappearances, they reconnected. The conversation stretched on, a fragile truce held together by shared concern but fractured by doubt. As night deepened outside, Thomas felt the hotel's presence like a cold breath against his skin. Later, alone in his rented room, Thomas spread the photographs across the worn desk. The hotel loomed in each frame, its crumbling facade a silent sentinel. He traced its outline with a finger, feeling the pull of nostalgia mixed with dread. A sudden chill swept the room, and the shadows seemed to flicker and stretch unnaturally. Was it his imagination, or was the hotel watching still? The thought gnawed at him, feeding his obsession even as Evelyn's warning echoed in his mind. He whispered to the empty room, "I won't stop. Not until I understand." Outside, the wind moaned softly through the streets, carrying the weight of secrets and lost souls waiting patiently in the mist. The night deepened, and Thomas's resolve hardened. The town's secret was alive, and he was entwined in its dark embrace, teetering on the edge between revelation and ruin. As the clock ticked relentlessly onward, the hotel's faded image flickered in his mind's eye, a ghostly reminder that some pasts refused to die quietly. The question was no longer whether he could uncover the truth, but whether he could survive it. The shadows lengthened. The afternoon sun was waning as Thomas Graves approached the small, weather-beaten house on the edge of town. The sky overhead was a hazy gray, the light muted and heavy, as if reluctant to witness what was to come. He felt the familiar weight of dread settling in his chest as he raised a hand to knock on the door. When it opened, a woman stood there, her face pale, eyes shadowed with sleepless nights and unspoken sorrows. Sarah Whitman. She stepped aside wordlessly to let him in, the silence between them thick and fraught with unvoiced pain. The interior was modest, a few faded photographs pinned to the walls, and a worn sofa that had seen better days. Sarah motioned for him to sit, then retrieved a small bundle from a nearby table. Carefully, she unfolded it, revealing a photograph, a fragile, sepia-toned image of a young man standing on a rocky shore, the faded outline of the hotel looming distantly behind him. "That's my brother," she said quietly, her voice cracking. This was the last photo anyone took of him. He was supposed to be coming home that night. But he never did. Thomas reached out, his fingers brushing the edge of the photograph. The image was hauntingly familiar, the same derelict hotel he had seen in countless other missing persons pictures, always lurking in the background like a ghostly sentinel. He noticed the way the light in the photo seemed oddly muted, the hotel's outline almost trembling at the edges. "Can you tell me about the day this was taken?" Thomas asked gently. Sarah nodded, tears gathering. "He went down to the beach to take some pictures, said he needed to clear his head. We hadn't spoken much lately. I think he was troubled. That night, he sent me this photo, and then he was gone." Thomas kept his gaze fixed on her, sensing the depth of her grief. "Have you heard from anyone else who saw him that day, or noticed anything unusual?" She shook her head. "No. The town just. It's like everyone's afraid to talk about the hotel, like it's some kind of curse." That word, a curse, resonated deeply with Thomas. He had come here chasing shadows and whispers, but now the pieces were beginning to coalesce into something far darker than he had imagined. Later, back in his small rented room, Thomas laid out the photographs he had collected. Each one bore the same spectral hotel in the distance, a faded, crumbling edifice that seemed to be a silent witness to tragedy. He studied them carefully, noting subtle distortion, shadows that seemed to flicker unnaturally, faces blurred or stretched at the edges. It was as if the hotel itself was reaching out through the images, pulling at the souls of those who gazed upon it. The room was thick with the scent of salt and old paper. The quiet punctuated only by the soft click of his camera shutter as he rephotographed the images under different lights. With each flash, he caught fleeting shapes, ghostly silhouettes that vanished when he blinked. His heart pounded with a mixture of fear and fascination. Determined to see the hotel for himself, Thomas ventured down to the rocky shore as a storm gathered. The wind tore at his clothes, carrying the sharp tang of the sea and the distant cries of gulls. The hotel's outline stood stark against the tumultuous sky, a ghost-like presence that seemed to pulse with malevolence. He shivered, not from the cold, but from the unmistakable feeling that he was being watched. Returning to his room, Thomas was haunted by Sarah's story and the spectral images he had captured. His notes grew longer, his nights shorter, and the thin veil between reality and nightmare began to fray. He knew the hotel was at the heart of the disappearances, but what power did it hold? How did it trap its victims? And was he already caught in its grip? The questions spun relentlessly in his mind as he stared once more at the photographs, the faces frozen in time, the hotel looming ever-present, and the creeping dread that he too might become just another lost soul, swallowed by the haunted frame. And as the night deepened, Thomas felt the first cold brush of something unseen slipping through the shadows, whispering his name on the wind. The investigation was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The afternoon sun hung low over the coastal town as Thomas Graves made his way through the narrow, winding streets toward the outskirts where the locals claimed Old Man Carver resided. The air was thick with the salt tang of the sea and the faint, chilling mist that seemed to seep from the shoreline itself. Thomas's steps echoed softly against the cobblestones, his worn leather shoes carrying the weight of a growing obsession. Each new lead, every whispered secret, seemed to draw him closer to the shadowed truth that haunted this town. Carver's cottage, a ramshackle structure leaning precariously against the rising wind, came into view. Its walls, weathered and gray, were overgrown with tangled ivy that clung desperately to the rotting wood beneath. The small windows, clouded with age and dust, barely reflected the dying light. Thomas hesitated for a moment, then knocked firmly on the battered door. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow hallway suffused with the scent of old paper, damp wood, and the unmistakable sharpness of sea spray carried in on the breeze. The interior was cramped and dim, shelves sagging under the weight of countless books, trinkets, and faded photographs. A fire flickered weakly in the hearth, casting dancing shadows that seemed to breathe with the room itself. From the dimness emerged Old Man Carver, a wiry figure with a face deeply etched by time and hardship. His eyes, bright and sharp despite the years, fixed immediately on Thomas with an intensity that both unsettled and intrigued. Dressed in a worn tweed jacket and a threadbare flat cap, Carver moved with surprising agility as he gestured for Thomas to sit by the fire. "So, you're the one poking around the hotel's shadow," Carver said, his voice low and gravelly, like stones tumbling over one another. "Not many have the courage or the foolishness to ask questions about that place anymore." Thomas nodded, his gaze steady. "I need to understand. There's a pattern, a curse maybe. Every missing person's last photograph shows the hotel. I want to know why." Carver chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "The curse. It's older than you think. Older than most here remember." He leaned closer, the firelight illuminating the deep hollows of his face. Long ago the hotel was a place of grander promises of refuge and joy by the sea. But tragedy struck. The original owner, a man named Gideon Morrow, was a man consumed by loss. His wife and child vanished under mysterious circumstances, and some say that grief shattered his mind. They say he bound his sorrow to the very walls of the hotel, a dark tether that twisted the place into something dreadful. The hotel became a prison, a liminal space where lost souls linger, drawn by the same desperation that consumed Gideon himself. Thomas felt a chill crawl up his spine as he listened, the old man's words painting scenes of sorrow and despair that seemed almost tangible. But why the photographs? Why do the missing always appear with the hotel in the background? Carver's eyes gleamed with a strange light, and he tapped his bony finger against the armrest. Because the hotel feeds on nostalgia, on longing for what is gone. It pulls the desperate in, trapping them in a nightmare woven from their own memories. The images you see are the last traces of those souls before they slip beyond our reach. A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, and the candle flames flickered wildly, casting grotesque shadows that seemed to stretch and twist across the walls. Carver's voice dropped to a whisper. "Beware, Thomas. This place is hungry. It's always hungry." The fire crackled louder, and for a moment, the room seemed to pulse with an unseen energy. Thomas swallowed hard, the weight of the old man's words settling heavily on his mind. He realized that the hotel was more than just a building. It was a malevolent entity, a trap fashioned from despair and memory. As dusk slipped into night, Thomas rose to leave, the storm outside having grown fierce. The wind howled through the trees, and the salt spray stung his cheeks as he stepped back onto the path leading away from the cottage. The distant outline of the hotel loomed through the mist, a ghostly sentinel against the darkening sky. His thoughts churned with Carver's tales, each revelation tightening the grip of obsession and dread. Thomas knew the path ahead would be perilous, but the truth demanded pursuit. And somewhere within the shadowed halls of that cursed hotel, the answers and perhaps his own fate awaited. The night swallowed him as he disappeared into the swirling fog, the echoes of old legends trailing behind him like mournful whispers carried on the wind. The chill of the evening crept over the coastal town like a slow, unwelcome tide. Thomas Graves found himself drawn once more to the beach, the place where the hotel hung on the horizon like a ghostly sentinel, its faded silhouette swallowed by the thickening mist. The air was heavy with the scent of salt and damp earth, and the subdued roar of the sea mingled with the soft rustle of wind through the grasses. As the daylight faded, a subtle change settled over the world, a shift Thomas felt deep in his bones, as if the very fabric of reality were thinning. He stood motionless, eyes fixed on the spectral outline of the hotel, his camera hanging forgotten at his side. From the depths of the mist came a faint murmur, almost imperceptible, like whispered voices carried on the breeze. The words were unintelligible, but their tone was unmistakably mournful, laden with sorrow and longing. Thomas's heart quickened. A shiver raced down his spine. He wrapped his coat tighter around him, but the cold was not merely from the sea air. It was the creeping presence of something unseen, something that sought him out. Earlier that day, in the cramped, book-lined room of the local library, Evelyn Marsh had met him with a look that blended concern and wariness. Her delicate hands trembled slightly as she unfolded a brittle photograph, the edges yellowed with age. The image showed the hotel in its prime, standing proud against a clear sky. But faintly, almost imperceptibly, a translucent figure hovered near the building's edge, a pale, sorrowful shape caught between worlds. "No one likes to speak of it," Evelyn murmured, her voice low, as if afraid the walls themselves might overhear. "The hotel holds memories. Or perhaps souls that refuse to rest. They say it feeds on the past, on the regrets and grief of those who look upon it too long." Thomas absorbed her words, their weight settling heavily in his mind. Every step deeper into the mystery seemed to pull him further from the tangible world. His photographs, once clear and sharp, now bore strange anomalies, blurred edges, ghostly figures lurking just beyond the frame. It was as if the hotel reached out through the images, drawing him closer into its haunting embrace. That night, the town felt different. Thomas wandered the narrow streets beneath flickering street lamps that seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm. Shadows stretched and contracted, darting just beyond his peripheral vision, teasing and taunting. Time itself warped. Seconds dragged into minutes, and then snapped forward in sudden bursts. The ghostly apparitions appeared and vanished without warning, their presence both fleeting and persistent. He stopped abruptly as a chill breeze swept past, carrying the faint scent of aged wood and forgotten memories. A whisper brushed against his ear, a voice both familiar and alien, echoing from the depths of his own grief. Thomas closed his eyes, struggling to hold onto the fragments of reality slipping through his grasp. Days later, a confrontation with Detective Mark Halstead underscored the widening gulf between Thomas and the rest of the town. Halstead's pragmatic skepticism clashed sharply with Thomas's growing belief in the supernatural forces at play. The detective's voice was firm, but edged with frustration. His brow furrowed as he urged Thomas to reconsider his obsession. "This isn't some ghost story, Graves," Halstead said, his tone more wary than angry. "People are disappearing, yes, but we need facts, evidence, not fantasies." Thomas met his gaze, wary and haunted. "And what if the facts are hidden in the shadows you refuse to see? What if the truth isn't bound by your logic?" Their words hung heavy between them, a chasm widening with every passing day. Evelyn watched from the sidelines, her eyes shadowed with worry. She knew the price of delving too deeply into the hotel's secrets, a price Thomas was teetering on the edge of paying. As the shadows lengthened across the town, so too did Thomas's isolation. The hotel's influence tightened its grip, pulling him inexorably closer to its spectral heart. The whispers grew louder, the visions more vivid, and the line between past and present, reality and nightmare, blurred beyond recognition. And somewhere within that shifting haze, the hotel waited patient, hungry, eternal. The night deepened, and Thomas's breath misted in the cold air. The hotel loomed just beyond the reach of his vision, a fading beacon in the swirling fog. He took a hesitant step forward, the weight of unseen eyes pressing upon him. How much longer could he resist the pull? How many more shadows would need to lengthen before he became just another lost soul, trapped forever in the hotel's cursed embrace? The answer was veiled in the mist, whispered on the wind, and captured in the fading light of the photograph that was yet to be taken. And so, with trembling resolve, Thomas moved deeper into the night, the shadows lengthening all around him. The rain hammered insistently against the stained glass windows of the town archive, the dull roar of the storm outside a stark contrast to the eerie silence that filled the cramped room. Thomas Graves sat hunched over a rickety wooden desk, a single lamp casting a pool of jaundiced light across a collection of brittle papers and worn books. His fingers trembled slightly as he turned the fragile pages of a diary, its leather cover cracked and faded, the ink blurred in places by age and damp. The diary belonged to the hotel's original owner, a man named Elijah Harrow, whose name Thomas had encountered repeatedly in his research, but whose story had remained frustratingly elusive. Each entry was a window into a past steeped in sorrow, desperation, and a creeping madness that seemed to seep from the words themselves. June 14, 1927, Thomas read aloud softly, his voice barely more than a whisper. "The sea has not been kind these past weeks. Guests grow restless, their laughter hollow, their eyes shadows of fear. I dare not leave the premises after dark. Something stirs beyond the cliffs, a chill that gnaws at the soul." A sudden clap of thunder shook the building, and Thomas flinched, his pulse quickening. He pressed on, drawn deeper into the tale. Over the following pages, Elijah chronicled the slow unraveling of his sanity, the inexplicable disappearances of visitors, and the growing sense that the hotel itself was alive, feeding on the memories and regrets of those who crossed its threshold. When Thomas reached the entry dated October 3, 1927, his breath caught. "My wife has left me. The despair that clings to these walls is no longer mine alone. I fear I have doomed this place and all who enter it. If these pages survive, let them be a warning. The hotel is a prison, a liminal space where time folds and souls are trapped, forever caught between what was and what might have been." The weight of Elijah's words settled heavily on Thomas' shoulders. Here was the genesis of the curse, a despair so profound it tainted the very fabric of the hotel, ensnaring anyone who glimpsed it through the lens of a camera or the eye of the mind. Later that evening, Thomas met with Evelyn Marsh in the cozy confines of the town library. The low hum of the heating system mingled with the faint rustle of turning pages as Evelyn adjusted her glasses and studied the diary alongside him. Elijah Harrow's story is one the town has tried to bury, she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. His wife's departure was the catalyst, but the real horror began when he vanished without a trace. People whispered that the hotel swallowed him whole. Thomas nodded, his eyes distant, and the disappearances since then. A cycle, Evelyn replied. The hotel feeds on nostalgia and despair. It traps those who dare to remember too deeply or cling too tightly to the past. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Old man Carver entered, his presence as imposing as ever despite his frail frame. His eyes gleamed with a knowing light as he settled near the fireplace, the flames casting flickering shadows across his lined face. "You're poking at things better left alone," he warned, voice gravelly but steady. "That hotel's no mere building, it's a curse forged from a broken heart and bitter memories. It hungers, lad, and it's patient." Thomas listened intently as Carver wove tales of vanished travelers, spectral figures glimpsed in the mist, and a darkness that devoured hope itself. The old man's stories added layers of dread and gravity to the puzzle Thomas was trying desperately to solve. As the night deepened, Thomas found himself alone once more, staring out at the ghostly outline of the hotel through rain-streaked windows. The building seemed less like a ruin and more like a sentinel watching over the town's secrets, its presence a silent reminder of the inescapable past. He felt the curses pull tightening around him, a cold grip that whispered of despair and loss. Yet within that darkness, a spark of determination flickered. If the hotel was a prison, then understanding its origins was the first step toward breaking free. Thomas turned back to the diary, the fragile pages now a lifeline in the gathering storm. The threads of tragedy and torment were unraveling before him, and with each revelation came both clarity and deeper unease. The hotel was no mere backdrop, it was the heart of the nightmare, its malevolent presence a living thing that fed on the restless souls caught in its web. And Thomas knew with chilling certainty that his own thread was now woven irrevocably into the tapestry of the curse. As the clock in the town square chimed midnight, Thomas made a silent vow. He would delve deeper into the shadows, confront the past head-on, and fight against the dark legacy that threatened to consume them all. But with every step forward, the hotel's grasp grew tighter, and the line between reality and nightmare blurred further into a haunting, nostalgia-tinged abyss. The storm outside began to abate, but within Thomas, a tempest raged on one that would not be quelled until the secrets of the hotel were laid bare, or he became yet another lost soul swallowed by its spectral embrace. Thomas Graves had never truly believed in the supernatural, at least not in the way the locals seemed to fear. Yet, as he stood on the jagged cliffs overlooking the restless sea, the old hotel's silhouette blurred in the thickening mist, something inside him shifted. The crashing waves below carried a hollow timbre, a mournful cadence that seemed to echo the whispers haunting his mind. The hotel was no longer just a distant relic in a photograph. It had become a living presence pressing in on his senses. Earlier that day, the boundaries between reality and illusion had begun to dissolve. Thomas had returned to the cramped room he rented above the town's small inn, hoping to find some clarity amid his growing obsession. The walls, lined with peeling wallpaper patterned with faded floral motifs, seemed to breathe and pulse with an unnatural rhythm. In his hands, the scattered photographs of the missing trembled as if alive, faces merging and shifting with spectral shadows. He blinked, trying to steady his vision, but the room warped. The faces of the lost appeared and vanished, their eyes pleading silently. One photograph in particular caught his gaze, the last known image of his old friend, Michael, who had vanished years ago under eerily similar circumstances. The hotel appeared there too, faint and ghost-like in the background. Thomas's breath hitched as the room grew colder, the shadows lengthening until they almost overtook him. Memories surged unbidden, Michael's laughter on a sun-drenched afternoon, their shared discussions about unexplained phenomena, the day he disappeared without a trace. Thomas's heart clenched with a sorrow that the years had never dulled. The hotel's curse was no longer an abstract mystery, but a personal torment threatening to consume him. The next morning, Thomas met with Evelyn Marsh at the town library, hoping the familiar sanctuary might anchor his fraying mind. Evelyn's sharp eyes softened with concern when she noticed his pale complexion and the trembling hands that clutched a battered leather-bound journal. "Thomas," she said gently, "you are pushing yourself too hard. The hotel's history is dark, but you must guard your own spirit." He nodded, though inside he felt the weight of despair pulling him deeper. Detective Mark Halstead's skeptical presence loomed in the background, a reminder of the rational world that still resisted the creeping shadows. Yet, even Halstead's pragmatism could not deny the strange occurrences surrounding the hotel. As evening fell, Thomas found himself alone once more, the fog curling around the hotel like spectral fingers. His mind unraveled further when an apparition appeared, Michael's face, flickering like a candle flame in a drafty room, speaking in riddles about lost memories and unfinished stories. The line between past and present, life and death, blurred into a haunting tapestry woven by the hotel's malevolent will. Thomas realized that his emotional vulnerability was the hotel's weapon, a key to unlocking the prison of souls trapped within its walls. But deep within that torment lay a fragile thread of hope, a chance to confront the despair and perhaps break the cycle. As the night deepened, Thomas's resolve hardened. He would not succumb to the fading boundaries of reality. Whatever horrors awaited, he would face them head-on. The past was not dead. It was a living shadow, and he was determined to chase it to its end even if it meant losing himself entirely. Outside, the hotel stood silent, watching, waiting. And somewhere in the distance, the wind carried the faintest echo of a photograph's whisper, promising that the nightmare was far from over. The library was cloaked in the muted glow of late afternoon, the kind of light that seemed to cling to the dust motes drifting lazily above the rows of ancient books. Thomas Graves sat hunched over a worn wooden table, the surface scarred with decades of use and neglect. Here, he was surrounded by the town's collective memory, a fragile archive of faded photographs, brittle newspapers, and handwritten journals that smelled of mildew and time. Evelyn Marsh leaned close, her voice a cautious whisper that barely disturbed the heavy silence. "You must understand," she said, adjusting her glasses with a trembling hand, "this hotel isn't just a building, it's something else, something between." She paused, eyes flickering nervously toward the window, where the mist was beginning to roll in from the sea. Between life and death, between what we remember and what slips away, Thomas's gaze shifted back to the photographs spread before him. Each one showed the hotel, its faded silhouette looming at the horizon behind smiling faces frozen in time, the last images of those who vanished without a trace. He traced a finger along the edges of one particularly aged print, noting the peculiar blurring around the hotel's outline, as if it were both there and not there. "Look here," he murmured, pointing to the photo. "See how the edges shimmer? It's like the hotel is bleeding through the veil of reality itself." Evelyn nodded slowly. "That shimmer, it's what the old stories tried to describe. A place caught in a liminal state, a crossing point where the living and the lost meet. The hotel traps them there, caught in memories and despair." The words sent a chill coursing down Thomas's spine. He had expected skepticism or dismissal, but here was confirmation, cryptic though it was, that the hotel held a supernatural significance. Yet doubt gnawed at him just as fiercely as his growing obsession. The next day brought a confrontation he could not avoid. Detective Mark Halstead's office was a stark contrast to the library's fading grandeur. The walls were bare, save for a few wanted posters and a calendar pinned with hastily scribbled notes. Halstead himself sat behind a cluttered desk, arms crossed, expression tight with skepticism. "Graves," he said, voice blunt, "I respect your work, but chasing ghosts won't solve these disappearances. You've got no proof that this hotel is anything more than an abandoned ruin." Thomas met the detective's gaze steadily. "I don't expect you to believe until you see it for yourself. But the photographs, they aren't just coincidences. There's something about the hotel, something that defies explanation." Halstead shook his head. "People go missing for all sorts of reasons. Drugs, running away, foul play. You getting lost in nostalgia and superstition." The tension in the room was palpable, a collision of rationality and the inexplicable. Thomas left the station with a heightened resolve, his mind a storm of conflicting emotions. Back in his hotel room that evening, the growing obsession consumed him. He spread the photographs across the creaking wooden floor, their glossy surfaces catching the weak light of the street lamp outside. As shadows flickered and danced across the images, Thomas noticed subtle distortions, faint halos, impossible reflections, and ghostly figures lurking just beyond the frame's edge. He leaned closer, heart pounding. "It's not just a building," he whispered to himself. "It's a doorway." Days later, under the twilight sky in the town square, Thomas sat beside Evelyn beneath the sprawling branches of the ancient oak. The wind rustled through the leaves, carrying with it the salt-scented breath of the sea. Evelyn's eyes held a melancholic weight as she spoke of the hotel's dark legacy. "My family has lived here for generations," she confided. "We've seen the disappearances and heard the stories passed down in hushed tones. The hotel is a place where time folds, where memories become prisons. It's no ordinary curse, it's the weight of loss made manifest." Thomas felt the crushing gravity of her words, the oppressive sorrow that clung to the town like the ever-present mist. Here, at this crossroads of memory and reality, he realized the true danger he faced. The hotel was not merely a backdrop to tragedy, but the very heart of it, a spectral nexus that threatened to consume him as it had so many before. Yet, despite the warnings and the skepticism, Thomas's resolve hardened. The photographs, the whispers, the shifting shadows, they all pointed to a truth he could no longer ignore. As darkness settled over the town, Thomas sat alone in his room. The images of the lost souls spread like a mosaic of despair around him. Somewhere beyond the veil of night, the hotel waited, timeless and patient, its haunted gaze fixed upon him. What awaited him at the threshold was uncertain. But Thomas knew one thing with absolute clarity: to understand the hotel was to confront the very essence of memory and loss, and to do so, he must walk willingly into the shadows. Thomas Graves hesitated at the threshold of the hotel at the end of the photograph, his breath visible in the cold morning air that mingled with the salty tang of the sea. The building loomed before him, a vast silhouette against the creeping mist, its once grand facade, now a crumbling monument to forgotten times. The windows stared blankly like empty eye sockets, darkened and hollow, while the warped front door sagged on rusted hinges, groaning softly as if warning him away. Yet, despite the instinctual urge to turn back, Thomas stepped forward. His fingers brushed the peeling paint, rough and brittle beneath his touch, before grasping the heavy iron handle. As the door swung open, a chilling breath issued forth, a misty cascade that curled around his feet and clung to his clothes. The stale, oppressive air within smelled of damp wood, salt, and an undercurrent of something far older, something decayed not just in body but in spirit. Inside, the hotel swallowed him whole. The grand lobby, once a place of lively gatherings and laughter, now echoed with an eerie silence that pressed upon his ears like a physical weight. The wallpaper hung in tatters, faded floral patterns barely discernible beneath layers of grime. Furniture lay scattered and broken, and the once polished floorboards creaked and moaned beneath his tentative steps. But it was not merely the physical decay that unsettled Thomas. As he ventured deeper, the very walls seemed to breathe and shift, their outlines wavering as though the building existed in some liminal space between worlds. Shadows danced at the edges of his vision, flickering and retreating whenever he tried to focus on them. Soft whispers curled through the air, indistinct murmurs that brushed against the edges of his consciousness, but always slipped away before he could catch their words. The hotel was alive and it was watching. Thomas's pulse quickened as he made his way down a long, narrow corridor. The flickering light of his battered flashlight barely penetrated the oppressive gloom. Doors on either side stood half open, revealing glimpses of rooms frozen in time, cracked mirrors, decayed upholstery, and walls smeared with the shadows of long-forgotten grief. Then, in the dim glow, figures began to emerge, at first mere wisps of light and shadow flitting in the periphery. But as Thomas pressed onward, the shapes coalesced into ghostly forms, lost souls trapped within the hotel's spectral domain. Their faces were blurred, their eyes hollow wells of sorrow and longing. They moved in slow, repetitive loops, caught in endless cycles of memory and pain. One such figure drifted near, a woman in a faded dress, her translucent hand reaching out as if yearning for something just beyond reach. Thomas stretched out his own hand, desperate to touch her, to offer solace, but his fingers passed through her like smoke. She turned, eyes meeting his briefly, filled with a silent plea that pierced his heart before she faded into the shadows. The oppressive atmosphere thickened, and time itself seemed to fracture. Clocks mounted on peeling walls spun erratically, their hands whirling in impossible patterns. The air shimmered, and Thomas found himself momentarily transported faces and places from his own past bleeding into the present. The room around him twisted and contorted, shifting between memories and spectral visions in an unsettling dance. A sudden chill ran down his spine as he confronted a vision of his lost friend, the one whose disappearance had first drawn him here. The friend's face, pale and haunted, flickered like a broken film reel before dissolving into the mist. Thomas's breath caught, and for a moment his own reality wavered. Clenching his fists against the rising tide of terror and disorientation, Thomas forced himself to move forward. Each step deeper into the hotel's heart was a step deeper into the curse's grasp. The building was a prison of memories, a liminal space where time folded back upon itself and despair fed the malevolent force within. Yet, amidst the swirling shadows and haunting whispers, Thomas sensed a fragile thread of hope, a path to understanding the curse and perhaps breaking it. The hotel's secrets were laid bare in its shifting corridors and spectral inhabitants. To escape, he would need to confront not only the entity that bound the hotel, but also the ghosts of his own past. As he paused in a vast, decaying ballroom, the echoes of a long-forgotten waltz whispered in the air. The walls seemed to pulse with memories, and the mist thickened around him, enveloping Thomas in a cold embrace. The hotel's true nature revealed itself in that moment. It was less a building and more a manifestation of loss, nostalgia, and despair, feeding on the souls it ensnared. Thomas swallowed hard, steeling himself for the trials ahead. The line between the living and the dead was thinner here than anywhere else he had known. To save himself and those lost within, he would have to navigate the shifting nightmare, face his deepest fears, and unravel the curse's tangled threads. With a final glance at the spectral figures drifting aimlessly through the dim corridors, Thomas stepped forward into the mist, deeper into the hotel at the end of the photograph. The door groaned shut behind him, sealing his passage and marking the beginning of a journey from which there might be no return. The air grew heavier as Thomas crossed the threshold into the heart of the hotel, a place where light seemed to bend and shadows whispered secrets long buried. The warped wooden floorboards groaned beneath his feet, every echo swallowed by the suffocating silence that prevailed. A chill seeped into his bones, not from any draught but from the palpable weight of sorrow that clung to the walls like a second skin. Faintly, through the gloom, he caught the shimmer of movement, ghostly figures flickering at the edge of his vision. As if reluctant to be seen but unable to resist the pull of his gaze. Faces, pale and blurred, revealed glimpses of lives interrupted, a woman clutching a child, a man frozen mid-step, their eyes wide with a mixture of hope and despair. These were the lost souls trapped between worlds, prisoners of a curse that fed on their lingering nostalgia. Thomas' breath came shallow and quick as he ventured deeper, the hotel twisting around him in impossible ways. Corridors looped back upon themselves. Doors opened to rooms that blurred into memories both his own and those of the vanished. The line between past and present thinned until it vanished entirely, leaving him suspended in a liminal space where time was fractured and fluid. At the core of this spectral labyrinth, the malevolent entity awaited an intangible force radiating despair so intense it threatened to crush him. It spoke not in words but in emotions, flooding his mind with visions of loss and longing. He saw the original owner of the hotel, consumed by grief so profound it birthed the curse, binding every soul who ever gazed upon the hotel's faded facade in a prison of memory. Thomas felt the entity's pull, an irresistible urge to surrender and become yet another faded shadow within the hotel's walls. But within his pocket, the worn photograph of his lost friend seemed to pulse with a faint light, a beacon anchoring him to his resolve. Clutching it tightly, he forced himself to see beyond the despair, to remember not just the pain, but the will to fight. The hotel trembled around him, its ghostly halls whispering tales of sorrow and regret, but Thomas' determination blazed brighter than the shadows. He knew the path forward was perilous, fraught with illusions designed to break his spirit. Yet in that moment, amidst the swirling mists of memory and nightmare, he faced the hotel's true face, not just a building, but a living prison of souls, a manifestation of loss itself. As the chapter closed, the spectral walls seemed to pulse with a new energy, the contest between Thomas' hope and the entity's despair poised to escalate. Outside, the mist thickened, concealing the hotel's secrets as the past and present converged into an inevitable confrontation. The air inside the hotel was thick and unyielding, pressing down on Thomas Graves like a physical weight. As he took cautious steps down the dim corridor, the once familiar surroundings warped subtly, walls seeming to breathe with a slow, agonizing rhythm. The peeling wallpaper, mottled and stained by decades of neglect, seemed to ripple faintly under his gaze, as if the fabric of the hotel itself was alive and watching. Whispers fluttered just beyond the edge of hearing, indistinct murmurs that teased the edge of comprehension, laced with sadness and menace. Thomas's breath caught in his throat. The oppressive silence was punctuated only by the soft scuff of his worn boots on the warped wooden floor. His fingers brushed frigid plaster, chilled beyond the coastal dampness outside. Each step felt like a descent deeper into a nightmare woven from memory and despair. Suddenly, the corridor around him blurred and shimmered, and the shadows lengthened and twisted, stretching into grotesque shapes that writhed at the periphery of his vision. A cold dread gripped his chest as the boundary between the tangible and the spectral thinned to a fragile membrane. He could almost taste the bitterness of forgotten sorrows and long-lost regrets. Then, as if pulled by unseen hands, Thomas found himself standing not in the derelict hotel but in a sunlit park. The scent of freshly cut grass and the warmth of sunlight on his face momentarily disoriented him. In the distance, a figure emerged, a smiling boy with dark hair, laughter bubbling from his lips. Recognition struck Thomas like a blow. It was his lost friend, the one whose disappearance had set him on this path. For a brief, aching moment, the cruel grip of time slackened, and Thomas reached for the apparition. But the light shifted. The boy's smile warped into a grimace, laughter twisted into a hollow, echoing moan. His form distorted, elongating and darkening until hollow eyes, black as voids, fixed on Thomas with a hunger that chilled him to his core. The warmth bled away, replaced by a suffocating cold that seeped into Thomas's bones. He staggered back, heart hammering, the illusion shattering like glass. Before he could gather himself, the scene morphed again. Now he stood within the confines of his childhood home, though it was a twisted caricature of memory. The walls flickered, one moment painted in soft pastel hues, the next cracked and bleeding shadows. The scent of old pine floorboards mixed with the metallic tang of something long decayed. Voices overlapped his mother's gentle calls, laughter from a forgotten summer, the sharp reprimand of a scolding teacher, all merging into a cacophony that threatened to drown him. Objects shifted shape under his gaze. A favorite toy would suddenly dissolve into a writhing mass of tendrils, a family photograph melting into a smear of indistinct faces. The familiar was alien, the comforting turned sinister. He gripped the edge of a warped table to steady himself, fighting the dizziness and rising panic. The hotel's curse was not merely a prison of souls, it was a labyrinth of fractured memories, a snare that ensnared the mind as surely as the body. In the midst of this chaos, a mirror appeared. Its surface shimmered unnaturally, reflecting not Thomas's wary, unshaven face but a shifting, terrible mosaic of lost souls. Their eyes were windows to endless sorrow, their mouths parted in silent screams and whispered cautions. The mirror seemed to pulse with dark energy, beckoning him to join the eternal chorus of the damned. Thomas felt himself trembling, the weight of despair pressing on him like a physical force. Yet, within the depths of that torment, a flicker of defiance sparked. He was not yet lost. The memories that haunted him, the grief for his vanished friend, the echoes of his own past were also his strength. To surrender would mean becoming another faded shadow, trapped forever in the hotel's cursed grasp. Gritting his teeth, Thomas forced himself to look away from the mirror. The illusions around him began to waver as his resolve hardened. He whispered to himself, a determination rising from the depths of his soul. He would confront the darkness, break the cycle, and reclaim the lost. The hotel might twist time and memory, but it could not yet claim him. As the spectral visions faded, the corridor returned. The wallpaper stopped pulsating, the whispers retreated into silence. Thomas exhaled slowly, wiping the sweat from his brow despite the cold. The hotel had tested him, drawn out his deepest fears and grief, but it had also shown him the price of surrender. He stepped forward, the echo of his boots a steady rhythm in the haunted silence. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with danger, but Thomas Graves was no longer merely a seeker of truth. He was a man prepared to face the darkest reflections of his soul to escape the hotel's clutches. And as he moved deeper into the building's shifting heart, a faint glimmer of hope flickered in the gathering shadows, fragile yet unyielding. Outside, the wind stirred the dead leaves by the shoreline, carrying with it the faintest echo of a whispered name, lost to time but not forgotten. Thomas's journey was far from over, and the haunted reflections within the hotel promised more trials before dawn. With a final glance at the fading corridor behind him, Thomas pressed onward, the line between memory and nightmare blurring but never breaking. The hotel waited, patient and eternal, its story entwined with his own. And somewhere beyond the veil of shadow, the lost watched and waited too. The chill in the air grew heavier as Thomas stepped deeper into the heart of the hotel, the shifting walls around him breathing with a life of their own. The dim, spectral glow cast ghostly shadows that writhed and twisted, as if the very building sought to disorient and trap him forever within its labyrinthine depths. His fingers clenched tight around his camera, the only tangible link to the world beyond this nightmare. Each step was a battle fought against the creeping dread that clawed at his mind, threatening to unravel the fragile thread of his sanity. A low murmur filled the corridor, whispers from the lost souls whose fates had been sealed here. They were echoes of sorrow, fragments of memories suspended in the thick mist that clung to every surface. Thomas's heart pounded fiercely. He knew that to survive, he would have to confront the source of this despair head-on. The curse was more than a mere haunting, it was a living, consuming force, feeding on nostalgia and grief, binding victims in eternal limbo. Navigating the twisting passageways, Thomas arrived at a vast chamber where time itself seemed to fracture. The walls shimmered with flickering images, faces blurred by years, some anguished, others resigned, all trapped in endless loops of their final moments. Thomas reached out, desperation flooding his veins as he tried to touch one apparition. The ghostly figure dissolved like mist, leaving behind a lingering ache of loss. "You must face it," a voice echoed in his mind, as if the building itself whispered counsel. "Confront the source to break free." Summoning every ounce of courage, Thomas pressed forward until he stood before a shadowy entity, a swirling mass of darkness and sorrow that radiated the crushing weight of decades-old despair. It was the embodiment of the original owner's grief, twisted into a malevolent presence that had cursed the hotel and ensnared countless souls. The temperature dropped, and shadows stretched like claws toward him. Thomas' breath came in ragged bursts, his body trembling, yet his resolve did not waver. He spoke aloud, his voice steady despite the terror gripping him. "I know your pain, but this suffering ends now. Release them. Release me." The darkness recoiled, and for a moment, the oppressive weight lifted. Light fractured through the gloom, illuminating the faces of the lost souls as they began to soften, their anguish easing. One by one, they drifted away, dissolving into the ether with a whispered farewell. Thomas staggered, exhaustion crashing over him like a wave. His body ached, and his mind reeled from the ordeal, but the oppressive grip of the hotel began to loosen. He was still trapped within this liminal space, yet a fragile hope flickered within him, a hope that the cycle could be broken. As the chamber's light dimmed, the hotel seemed to sigh, a final breath of resignation, or perhaps a warning that this victory was but a beginning. Thomas knew the path ahead remained perilous, but for the first time, he believed escape was possible. Clutching his camera, he prepared for the trials yet to come, determined to end the curse that had stolen so many lives, including the friend he had lost years before. Outside, the sea crashed relentlessly against the cliffs, indifferent to the struggles within the shadowed hotel. But inside, a silent battle had been waged, and for now, Thomas had broken the cycle. Thomas stepped lightly across the warped floorboards, the air heavy with the oppressive scent of salt and decay. The hotel, a labyrinth of shifting shadows and whispered memories, seemed to pulse around him, a living mausoleum of lost souls. Each corridor stretched and contracted, walls rippling like waves caught in some spectral tide. As he moved forward, the peeling wallpaper flickered with an unearthly glow, revealing faint portraits of a sorrowful man whose eyes bore the weight of an unbearable grief. Thomas's breath caught in his throat. These images, scattered throughout the hotel, felt like echoes of a past that refused to die, like fragments of a story begging to be told. He paused in a dimly lit lounge where time seemed to fold upon itself. The once grand room was now a ruin of cracked mahogany furniture and dust-choked air. On a table, half buried beneath debris, lay a leather-bound journal, its edges singed as if caught in a fire long extinguished. With trembling hands, Thomas opened it. The pages inside were yellowed and fragile, filled with cramped, anguished handwriting. The diary belonged to the hotel's original owner, a man consumed by sorrow after the loss of his beloved wife. His words bled desperation, confessions of loneliness, haunting dreams, and a growing madness that culminated in a curse bound not just to the building, but to the very souls who gazed upon it. The silence was punctuated only by the distant roar of the sea and the creaking bones of the ancient structure. Thomas's fingers traced the lines of the text, each phrase a thread weaving him tighter into the hotel's dark tapestry. A shiver ran down his spine as a sudden movement caught his eye. At the edge of the room, ghostly figures shimmered like mist, their translucent forms flickering in and out of focus. Their eyes, wide with longing and regret, locked onto his. Soft whispers rose around him, a chorus of lost souls murmuring names and memories, pleading for release from their eternal torment. Driven by a mixture of dread and determination, Thomas followed the spectral voices to a section of the floor where a knot-shaped emblem was carved into the rotting wood. The symbol, a tangled loop with no beginning or end, seemed to throb with a cold, unnatural energy. As he laid his palm upon it, the room brightened suddenly, flooded with a warm, golden light that chased back the shadows. It was a fleeting moment, but for Thomas, it ignited a fragile hope that the curse, however ancient and malevolent, might be undone. The hotel seemed to breathe around him, its walls whispering secrets of nostalgia and despair, of souls snared by their own longing. Yet within that suffocating sorrow, Thomas found a glimmer, a path illuminated by the original owner's tragic story and the symbolic imagery woven into the hotel's very fabric. His obsession, once a source of isolation and fear, now spurred him onward with renewed purpose. If he could decipher the full meaning of these symbols and the diary's cryptic entries, perhaps he could chart a course to redemption, to breaking the cycle of vanished lives and haunted memories. But as the warmth faded and the hotel's shadows crept back, Thomas knew the path ahead was fraught with peril. The malevolent presence would not relinquish its hold easily. Still, armed with knowledge and a flicker of hope, he pressed deeper into the heart of the haunted edifice, each step echoing with the whispers of those lost and the promise of salvation just beyond the veil. This fragile hope was a candle in the darkness, a light Thomas clung to as the hotel's shifting corridors twisted ever more unnervingly around him. The line between past and present blurred, memories tangled with spectral visions, and the weight of nostalgia threatened to crush his resolve. Yet the discovery of the emblem and the diary's revelations marked a turning point. For the first time, Thomas glimpsed a way through the nightmare, a chance to sever the curse's grip and free the souls imprisoned in this liminal prison. And so, with cautious heart and steady hand, Thomas ventured onward, the flickering hope in his chest a fragile flame against the encroaching shadows. The weight of nostalgia pressed down on Thomas' graves like a tangible force, heavier than the damp sea air that hung perpetually over the coastal town. He sat hunched over the battered library table, the flickering candlelight casting long, wavering shadows across the yellowed letters and faded photographs strewn before him. The scent of old paper, mingled with the faint salt tang wafting from the cracked window, filled the cramped space. Outside, the restless sea whispered ceaselessly, as if echoing the endless yearning embedded in the town's history. Thomas's fingers trembled as he traced the edges of a photograph, its surface worn smooth by time and handling. The image was deceptively simple, a group of smiling faces posed before the hotel, their eyes bright with life, framed by a sky smeared with a melancholic twilight hue. But the photo was no mere record of a moment. It was a gateway, a frozen memory that trapped more than just a scene. It held the lingering essence of those who had vanished, caught forever in a loop of longing and despair. His mind flickered unbidden to his own loss, the friend whose disappearance had ignited his obsession. The hotel, always present in the background of that final photograph, was more than a building, it was a prison of memory itself. And the deeper Thomas delved, the clearer it became that the hotel's curse fed not just on the flesh or spirit of its victims, but on their nostalgic attachments, the irreplaceable moments, the longing for what was lost or could never be reclaimed. Lost in thought, Thomas barely noticed the soft footsteps approaching until a familiar voice broke the silence. "You were chasing ghosts in more ways than one," Evelyn Marsh said gently, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. Her eyes, magnified by delicate spectacles, held a steady, empathetic sadness. She wore a vintage shawl that seemed to carry the weight of decades, and the flickering candlelight caught the strands of silver woven through her dark hair. Evelyn settled beside him, her voice dropping to a whisper as she recounted the tale of her ancestors, townsfolk who had long been entwined with the hotel's dark legacy. "They say the hotel isn't just a place," she murmured. "It's a living memory, a vessel for every sorrow, every lost hope. Those who step too close can't help but be pulled in, caught in the currents of their own longing." Thomas listened, the words resonating deeply within him. The idea that nostalgia itself could be a snare, a lure that twisted love and memory into chains, was both terrifying and heartbreaking. It explained the spectral presence in the photographs, the way the hotel seemed to breathe and shift, feeding on the emotional residue left behind. Later, standing alone on the shoreline as dusk blurred across the sky in bruised purples and deepening blues, Thomas clutched the faded photograph tighter. The hotel loomed ghost-like on the horizon, a silhouette etched against the dying light. The gentle lap of waves at his feet was a cruel reminder of time's indifferent passage. The invisible chains of memory tightened around him, threatening to pull him under into the same endless longing that had ensnared so many before. Back in his room, the boundary between reality and nightmare blurred. Suddenly, spectral figures swirled around him, faces half-remembered, voices whispering names and regrets that echoed in the hollow spaces of his mind. The air thickened, cold and suffocating, as the hotel's cruel embrace reached through the veil, seeking to claim him. Thomas fought to hold on to his sanity, grappling with the seductive despair that tempted him to surrender. Each whispered memory was a thread weaving a tapestry of sorrow and loss that threatened to consume him entirely. Yet within that darkness flickered a fragile ember of resolve, a determination to break free, to pierce the veil of nostalgia and shatter the curse that bound so many souls. As the night deepened, Thomas realized that the hotel's power lay not only in its supernatural malevolence, but in the very human emotions it preyed upon. To defeat it, he would have to confront not just the entity, but the painful memories within himself, the weight of nostalgia, and the aching void left by loss. The chapter closed with Thomas staring out into the encroaching darkness, the hotel's silhouette etched faintly against the horizon. The battle was far from over, but armed with new understanding, he prepared to face the shadows within and without, knowing that the past was a prison he might yet escape or become forever trapped inside. The corridor stretched before Thomas like a narrowing vein, its walls coated in peeling wallpaper that whispered secrets in the low moan of the coastal wind. As he stepped forward, the air thickened, charged with a presence unseen but palpably close. Then, faintly, voices soft, fractured, like shards of distant conversations drifted through the gloom. Thomas paused, his breath catching in his throat. The whispers were not random. They formed words, fragmented but laden with sorrow. "Please, remember." A voice trembled, barely audible. Another echoed, "Lost. Can't leave." The voices wove around him, a tapestry of despair spun from the souls imprisoned within this spectral edifice. Thomas's heart pounded as he realized these were not mere echoes of the past, but active calls for recognition, cries for liberation. Drawn deeper, Thomas entered a room where the dim light revealed a figure, a young woman, translucent and shimmering faintly, her eyes pools of infinite regret. She reached toward him, fingers stretched as if to grasp a lifeline. Her lips moved soundlessly, mouthing words he could not hear, yet the weight of her sorrow pressed heavily upon him. He wanted to speak, to comfort, but the gulf between worlds was vast and cold. As the apparition faded, Thomas felt a chill snake down his spine, a reminder of the hotel's malevolent hunger. He moved on, finding himself in a once grand parlor where the walls seemed to breathe with memories. Ghostly scenes played out, a man clutching a photograph, a child running toward a door that never opened, a woman sobbing in eternal silence. Each tableau was a fragment of a trapped soul's final moments, endlessly replayed in a loop of despair and nostalgia. The hotel, Thomas understood, was no mere building but a prison of memories, a liminal space where time twisted and grief congealed into a dark force. It fed on these emotions, growing stronger with each lost soul it claimed. The depths of its cruelty lay not just in captivity, but in the endless torment of reliving loss, the inability to move beyond the past's cruel hold. Suddenly the air grew colder still. A chorus of voices rose, weaving together in a crescendo of anguished lament that reverberated through the halls and into Thomas's very bones. Overwhelmed, he staggered, the weight of their collective despair pressing down, threatening to crush his spirit. Yet within the despair, a clarity emerged, an understanding that only by facing these stories, these regrets, could the curse be confronted. Thomas steadied himself, wiping sweat from his brow despite the chill. He had glimpsed the soul's suffering, their endless yearning for release. Their pain was the key, their stories the lantern to guide him through the hotel's labyrinthine curse. But with that knowledge came a peril. The more he connected with them, the more vulnerable he became to their sorrow. Gathering his resolve, Thomas whispered into the shadows, "I see you. I hear you. I will find a way to free you." The voices softened, a fragile hope threading through their mournful tones. Yet in the silence that followed, the hotel seemed to pulse alive, watching, waiting. The fight was far from over, but Thomas now carried a new weapon, the truth of the lost soul stories, and the fierce determination to break the cycle of despair. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, carrying with it the endless echoes of those trapped between worlds. And Thomas, standing alone amid the spectral shadows, knew that the path ahead would demand everything he had and more. The hotel's curse was cruel and relentless, but so was his will. The echoes of the lost were no longer just whispers. They were a summons. And Thomas Graves would answer. The air inside the hotel grew thick, as if time itself had congealed into a palpable fog that pressed against Thomas Graves' chest. He stepped cautiously through the shifting corridors, the walls bending and undulating like the surface of a disturbed pond. With every footfall, the very fabric of reality seemed to tremble, folding and unfolding upon itself in impossible ways. The hotel, a decrepit structure in the waking world, here revealed its true nature, a liminal prison where past, present, and future coalesced into a fractured maze. Thomas's breath hitched as a corridor stretched endlessly before him, the ceiling dissolving into a roiling gray sky. Shadows flickered at the edges of his vision, whispering in voices that were at once familiar and alien. He pressed forward, his pulse quickening with a mixture of dread and desperate curiosity. Ahead, the walls shimmered like a heat wave, and Thomas found himself drawn into a dimly lit room. There, the air hung heavy with the scent of salt and old wood, a spectral reenactment unfolding before him. The hotel's original owner, a gaunt man with hollow eyes, stood at the edge of a grand window, gazing out over the storm-tossed sea. His face twisted with despair, a silent scream etched into his features as memories of loss and betrayal consumed him. Thomas watched, breathless, as the man's anguish seemed to seep into the very walls, binding the curse that held the hotel and all its trapped souls in a timeless snare. Shaken, Thomas moved on, the corridor now bending and twisting unpredictably. He rounded a corner and found himself in a lounge that defied logic. The furniture flickered between the elegant style of a bygone era and the peeling decay of neglect. In the half-light, a figure emerged, himself, but younger, with clear eyes full of hope and determination. "Thomas," the apparition whispered, voice trembling with urgency, "do not surrender to the darkness that consumes this place. Your obsession is a path to ruin. Remember who you are." The specter of his former self reached out, fingers trembling as if trying to grasp something intangible. Thomas's throat tightened, a bitter mixture of sorrow and longing flooding his chest. The encounter was fleeting. The youthful Thomas dissipated like mist, leaving behind the cold silence of the hotel. Continuing deeper into the shifting maze, Thomas came upon a massive shattered mirror, its fractured surface reflecting countless, distorted images of himself. Each reflection bore a different expression: fear, regret, confusion, capturing moments from his past and possible futures he dared not imagine. The cacophony of voices echoed in his mind, fragmented memories and warnings colliding with raw emotion. The disorienting tableau overwhelmed him. He staggered back, heart pounding. The hotel's cursed presence was no longer just an external threat. It had begun to invade his very mind, warping his perception of reality. From the depths of the hotel came a haunting chorus, the whispers of lost souls entwined in the fabric of the place. Their voices layered together, a mournful symphony of regret and longing that filled the endless hallways. Thomas felt their sorrow press against his skin, a cold weight that threatened to crush his resolve. Yet amid the despair, a fragile thread of hope flickered within him. He realized that understanding the fractured nature of time within the hotel might be key to breaking the curse. But the path was perilous. The more he embraced the spectral truths, the closer he came to losing himself entirely. With a trembling hand, Thomas pressed forward, the hotel's shadows closing in around him. The fractured time held many secrets yet, and to uncover them all, he would have to confront not only the darkness within the hotel, but the darkness within himself. As the corridors twisted into impossible shapes and the whispers grew louder, Thomas' voice barely escaped his lips. "I will not become another lost soul. I will find the truth, no matter the cost." And with that, the hotel seemed to shudder, as if acknowledging his defiance, the boundaries of time fracturing further still in response. The corridor stretched before Thomas in oppressive silence, the faint glow of his flashlight wavering as the shadows seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Each step echoed hollowly, swallowed almost instantly by the vast emptiness of the hotel's forgotten wing. The air was thick, heavy with a dampness that clung to his skin, and a low, mournful wail drifted from somewhere deep within the building's bones, tugging at the edges of his sanity. Thomas swallowed hard, his breath visible in the chill that had settled like a weight around his chest. He could feel it now, an unbearable sorrow that seemed to seep from the very walls, an ancient grief that had been festering here long before any of the recent disappearances. It was as if the hotel itself was alive, breathing despair into the shadows. He pressed on, every nerve screaming in protest as the corridor narrowed, walls bending subtly as if the building were folding in on itself. Then, from the darkness ahead, a figure began to coalesce, a gaunt man with hollow, sunken eyes that burned with a sorrow so profound it almost crushed Thomas under its weight. The apparition was translucent yet painfully vivid, the edges of his form flickering like a candle flame caught in a cold draught. Thomas's heart pounded, his mind racing to place the figure. The stories he had uncovered spoke of the hotel's original owner, a man broken by loss, whose despair had cursed the very foundation of the place. This was the source of the hotel's malevolence, the wellspring of the endless cycle of vanished souls. "Why do you linger?" Thomas asked, his voice trembling yet steady. "What binds you here?" The spectral figure's mouth opened, but no words emerged, only a wave of raw emotion that slammed into Thomas like a physical blow. Memories not his own flooded his mind, a young woman's laughter fading into silence, a child's face blurring into shadows, a home swallowed by darkness. The weight of these recollections pressed down on Thomas's heart, dredging up his own buried grief, the loss he had tried so desperately to bury. For a moment, Thomas faltered, the despair threatening to pull him under. The hotel whispered promises of release through oblivion, tempting him to surrender to the nightmare of nostalgia and loss. But somewhere deep inside, a defiant spark ignited. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to breathe through the suffocating sorrow. "I will not become like you," he said, voice growing stronger. "I refuse to be consumed by this place." The apparition recoiled, the shadows around it flickering wildly as if disturbed by Thomas's resolve. A torrent of spectral anguish surged forth, but Thomas stood firm, anchoring himself to the fragments of clarity he had fought so hard to hold onto. Slowly the figure began to waver, its form unraveling into mist that dissipated into the stale air. Exhausted, Thomas sank to the floor, the weight of the encounter threatening to overwhelm him. Yet beneath the crushing sorrow, there was a glimmer of hope, the first real sign that the hotel's grip might be weakening. As he gathered himself, the oppressive silence returned, broken only by the distant crash of waves against the shore. The hotel still held its secrets, its curses, but Thomas had taken a crucial step into the depths of despair and lived to tell the tale. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since arriving, Thomas felt the tide turning. Somewhere beyond the shadows, a fragile path to redemption awaited. He rose shakily to his feet, steeling himself for the trials to come. The hotel's darkness was vast, but so was his resolve. And as he moved forward, the specter of loss no longer held him hostage. It had become the fuel for his fight. Outside, the mist curled around the hotel's faded silhouette, a silent sentinel watching, waiting. But in the heart of the cursed edifice, a flicker of light pierced the gloom, small, fragile, but undeniably there. And Thomas Graves would follow it, no matter the cost. The oppressive silence of the hotel corridor was punctuated only by the faint groans of the old building, as if it were breathing in and out with a slow, mournful rhythm. Thomas Graves stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the faded portrait hanging crookedly on the peeling wallpaper. The painting, worn by time and neglect, depicted a stern-faced man in Victorian attire, the original owner of the hotel, whose despair had, Thomas now understood, cursed this place and ensnared countless souls. The image flickered subtly, as if the very air around it quivered. Thomas felt the familiar tug of the hotel's malevolent presence pressing against his mind, threatening to dissolve the fragile barrier between reality and nightmare. Yet, amidst the swirling shadows and distant whispers, a single thought anchored him: understanding the past was his only salvation. He exhaled slowly, steadying his racing heart. Around him, the walls seemed to breathe, the faded wallpaper rippling like waves caught in a tempest. But Thomas reached out, pressing his palm flat against the cold, cracked plaster. A warmth bloomed beneath his hand, steady and real, defying the spectral chill that filled the room. It was a small beacon in the encroaching darkness, a tangible proof that amidst the shifting terror, some part of this place remained steady. Encouraged, Thomas sank to the floor, brushing dust and debris aside to reveal a battered leather-bound journal. The pages, yellowed and brittle, whispered secrets with every creak as he turned them carefully. Scrawled entries told of the hotel owner's descent into despair, the curse that twisted time and memory within these walls, and hints of a ritual to break the bond between the living and the lost. Each word was a thread in the tangled web of the hotel's history, and Thomas clung to them as desperately as he did to the warmth beneath his hand. The hotel was no longer just a haunted ruin. It was a liminal space, a prison of nostalgia and grief, but also a place vulnerable to understanding and challenge. As he pieced together the cryptic message, the room around him shifted again. Ghostly figures flickered at the edge of his vision, lost souls reaching out with silent pleas. Thomas's breath hitched, but he forced himself to focus, clutching tightly to the journal and the warmth that grounded him. His fingers brushed against something cold and metallic on the floor. Lifting it, he found a rusted key, its intricate design hinting at significance beyond mere decoration. This key, he realized with a surge of hope and dread, was the physical manifestation of the anchor. He had found a link to the past and a possible means to break free. The hotel seemed to sense his resolve, and the shadows recoiled slightly, as if reluctant to release their hold. Thomas stood slowly, the weight of the key heavy in his hand, but light in his heart. The path ahead was fraught with peril and uncertainty, but for the first time since he stepped into this nightmare, he glimpsed a way out. Outside, the mist clung thickly to the crumbling facade, but inside, amidst the shifting illusions and haunting memories, a glimmer of clarity shone, a fragile, flickering light in the darkness. Thomas Graves would hold on to it, no matter the cost. And so, with renewed determination, he stepped forward, ready to face whatever horrors awaited, driven by the hope that knowledge and will could shatter even the most ancient curses. The hotel's secrets were beginning to unravel, and Thomas was the key to unlocking them. The stale scent of aged paper and dust filled the cramped archive room at the back of the town library, where Thomas Graves sat hunched over a rickety wooden table. A single desk lamp cast a narrow pool of yellow light, its glow struggling to penetrate the dimness that clung stubbornly to the corners. Thomas's fingers trembled slightly as he carefully unfolded an old photograph, its creases brittle with age and edges frayed from years of handling. The image was faded but unmistakable. The hotel at the end of the photograph loomed in the background, its crumbling silhouette veiled in mist and shadow. Around it, ghostly shapes flickered, blurred figures whose faces seemed both distant and achingly familiar. Evelyn Marsh stood close by, her eyes reflecting the soft lamplight as she peered over Thomas's shoulder. "I never thought I'd see this again," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "This photograph has been tucked away in the archive for decades, forgotten by all but a few." Thomas nodded, his breath shallow. "It's more than just an image," he said. "There's something hidden here, something they didn't want anyone to find." Together, they examined the photograph's margins, where faint, almost imperceptible markings traced delicate patterns around the edges. Evelyn pulled out a magnifying glass from her bag, her hands steady despite the growing tension. As they deciphered the cryptic symbols, a narrative began to emerge, a story encoded in light and shadow, a secret message left behind by someone desperate to warn others. The symbols spoke of a curse rooted in despair and nostalgia, feeding on those drawn to the hotel's spectral allure. It described a liminal space where time warped and memories twisted, trapping souls in a nightmarish cycle. Thomas's heart pounded as the full weight of the revelation pressed down on him. The curse was not merely a legend. It was a malevolent force bound to the hotel's very foundation, sustained by the sorrow and longing of the lost. Outside, the coastal wind whispered through the cracked window panes, carrying with it the faint scent of salt and decay. The sound seemed to echo Thomas's mounting dread, a reminder that the past was never truly past. The photograph in his hands was more than a clue, it was a key, a final testament from those who had vanished, but whose stories still lingered in the shadows. Evelyn met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and resolve. "This changes everything," she said softly. "We can't ignore what we've found." The town's silence about the hotel isn't just superstition, it's a desperate attempt to keep the curse contained. Thomas swallowed hard, the familiar ache of loss tightening in his chest. Memories of his missing friend flickered through his mind, friends who had vanished, leaving behind only photographs, with the hotel faintly etched in the background. Now the truth was within reach, but so too was the danger looming ever closer. He reached out, tracing the hotel's outline in the photograph with a trembling finger. "I have to confront it," he whispered. "I have to understand it fully before it claims anyone else." Evelyn nodded, her expression grim but supportive. "We'll do whatever it takes to help you," she promised. The room seemed to grow colder as Thomas carefully packed away the photograph, the weight of its secrets settling heavily on his shoulders. The hotel was no longer just a backdrop in a series of tragic images, it was a living nightmare, a prison of memories and despair that needed to be broken. As they stepped out of the library into the chill evening air, the fading light cast long shadows across the town's streets. The hotel's silhouette still haunted the horizon, a silent sentinel watching from the edge of the world. Thomas's resolve hardened. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it head-on, armed now with the knowledge the last photograph had revealed. Yet beneath his determination, a flicker of unease remained, a whisper that the hotel's curse was far from defeated, and that the shadows still waited patiently for their next victim. The morning sun filtered weakly through the tall, narrow windows of the town library, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. Evelyn Marsh sat at an antique oak desk, her hands gently sifting through a pile of Thomas Graves's notes and photographs. The air smelled faintly of old paper and sea salt, a reminder of the town's unyielding proximity to the restless ocean. Her glasses caught the flicker of the desk lamp as she leaned closer, eyes narrowing in concentration. Each note, each image was a thread in a tapestry she was determined to unravel. She carefully spread out photographs of the faded hotel, its ghostly silhouette always lurking in the background of the missing person's last images. Names and dates were scribbled across the margins of Thomas's meticulous notes. As she connected the dots, The dark history of the hotel began to take shape, more clearly than ever before, a history that the town had long buried beneath layers of silence and superstition. Across town, Detective Mark Halstead sat in the cluttered office of the local police station, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. He held a faded photograph of the hotel, the edges worn and curling with age. His brow furrowed as he studied the image, a mixture of skepticism and reluctant intrigue clouding his expression. Duty demanded he find logical explanations, yet the evidence Thomas had uncovered gnawed at his rational mind. The disappearances, the hotel's repeated presence, there was a pattern too persistent to ignore. Halstead glanced at a map pinned to the wall behind his desk, marked with locations tied to the missing persons. He ran his fingers along the lines connecting each site, the hotel always looming at the center like a dark nexus. A sigh escaped his lips. The weight of the investigation pressed heavily, but for the first time, the notions of the supernatural seemed less far-fetched. Meanwhile, Thomas sat quietly in a small seaside cafe, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee. His eyes flicked between the window and the worn maps spread before him on the table. Across from him, Evelyn and Halstead spoke in hushed tones, their voices threading together the fractured pieces of the mystery. The tension was palpable, but beneath it lay a fragile hope that their combined efforts might finally pierce the shroud of fear enveloping the town. Evelyn's voice was steady as she recounted historical facts and personal anecdotes uncovered in her research. Halstead listened intently, occasionally nodding as he reconciled her findings with the evidence from his investigation. Thomas felt a flicker of something he hadn't allowed himself in weeks: optimism. The breakthrough came sooner than expected. Word spread through the town, and a hesitant crowd gathered in the local community hall. Faces were etched with lines of worry and exhaustion, eyes darting nervously as Evelyn and Halstead took the stage. The library historian and the pragmatic detective stood side by side, presenting the evidence that Thomas had painstakingly compiled. Photographs, timelines, and eyewitness accounts wove a narrative impossible to dismiss. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as the oppressive barrier of denial began to crumble. The hotel's spectral presence was no longer just a whispered myth, but a tangible menace linked directly to the disappearances. Some residents averted their gaze, unwilling to confront the chilling truth, while others exchanged glances that spoke of relief, the shared burden of fear finally given voice. Outside, the salty breeze stirred the curtains in the open windows, carrying with it the scent of the sea and the promise of change. The town stood on the cusp of awakening, its collective silence fractured by the threads of connection woven by Thomas, Evelyn, and Halstead. Yet beneath the tentative hope lay the ever-present shadow of the hotel, its faded walls still watching, waiting. In the quiet moments after the meeting, Thomas retreated to the shoreline. The waves lapped gently against the rocks, reflecting the soft pink hues of the setting sun. His mind churned with questions and fears, but also a burgeoning resolve. The curse's grip had weakened tonight, not vanquished, but fractured. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, the path forward was illuminated. As darkness settled over the town, the hotel remained a silent sentinel on the horizon, its spectral silhouette faint but unmistakable. The threads of connection had been woven. Now, the town must face the past it had long tried to forget. Thomas's journey was no longer solitary. United by truth and determination, they would confront the lingering shadows and the haunting legacy of the hotel together. And yet, in the depths of his heart, Thomas knew the curse was not so easily undone. The photographer's whisper was growing louder, beckoning him back into the mist where memory and nightmare intertwined. The air within the hotel's walls was thick and suffocating, laden with the salt and rot of the sea that clung like a damp shroud. Thomas Graves stepped cautiously into the grand foyer, the floorboards creaking beneath his worn boots as shadows shifted unnaturally around him. The faintest pulse of light, or was it breath, seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, as if the building were alive, exhaling centuries of despair in a slow, mournful sigh. Around him, the atmosphere vibrated with an eerie symphony, distant laughter, fragmented and hollow, tangled with the soft murmur of sobbing voices. Each whisper carried a weight, a name he recognized, a lost soul ensnared by the hotel's curse. Thomas's heart hammered as he strained to distinguish the voices, their sorrowful tones weaving through the silence like a spectral siren's call. He could feel the hotel's presence pressing in, tendrils of shadow curling at the edges of his vision, beckoning and threatening in equal measure. His breath caught, the cold seeping into his bones as memories stirred in the depths of his mind fragments of his own loss, the friend he'd never saved. The faces trapped forever in fading photographs. Moving forward, he entered a dim corridor where time seemed fractured. Along the peeling wallpaper, illusory figures took shape, his lost friend, the missing victims, their forms flickering like images warped by water. Their eyes held a profound sadness, voices trembling as they whispered pleas and warnings that gnawed at his resolve. The floor beneath him rippled like a disturbed pond, the edges of reality bending and warping. Thomas stumbled, caught in a maelstrom of recollections folding over themselves. The past, present, and future collided in a kaleidoscope of despair, threatening to pull him under into a vortex where hope was but a distant echo. Then, from the heart of the hotel, the malevolent force revealed itself. A shadowy tempest roiled in the darkness, a swirling mass of anguish and lost memories. It stretched spectral tendrils toward him, clawing at his mind, dredging up his deepest fears and the sharp sting of grief he carried like a wound that would not heal. Walls melted and twisted into nightmarish visions, desolate landscapes of forgotten time, where faces from the town's dark history flickered in and out of existence. Thomas felt the crushing weight of despair, his sanity fraying as the hotel sought to claim him as it had so many others. Yet, amid the chaos, a fragile ember of defiance kindled within him. Gritting his teeth, he fixed his gaze on the swirling mass, refusing to yield. His voice broke the oppressive silence, speaking words that wove through the darkness, words of hope, of release, of the strength to confront sorrow rather than be consumed by it. Light fractured the shadows, scattering the tendrils that sought to bind him. The hotel trembled, its spectral grip faltering as the trapped souls stirred, their voices rising in a chorus of longing and farewell. A path glimmered before Thomas, a way out of the nightmare, but the struggle was far from over. Breathless and battered, Thomas took a tentative step forward, the hotel's oppressive gloom retreating just enough to reveal the fragile boundary between worlds. The abyss had been faced, and though darkness still loomed, a flicker of hope remained, a slender thread upon which the fate of many now hung. As the echoes of the cursed presence faded into the distance, Thomas knew the final confrontation was but a prelude. The true battle to break the cycle and free the lost souls remained, but for the first time, he glimpsed a future beyond the hotel's haunted grasp, a future where memory and loss might coexist without devouring the living. With a steadying breath, he pressed onward, the weight of the past still heavy but no longer insurmountable. The abyss had been faced, and though shadows lingered, the dawn was coming. Thomas Graves stood at the threshold of the hotel's grand hall, the air around him thick with a suffocating stillness that seemed to press against his chest like an invisible weight. The walls, once elegant with faded floral wallpaper, shimmered and twisted before his eyes, as if the building itself breathed in time with his ragged heartbeat. In his hand, he gripped a crumpled photograph, a relic from the hotel's tragic past, depicting the original owner and his family, their faces frozen in a moment of despair and loss. The ghosts of the lost souls swirled around him, their translucent forms flickering like candle flames caught in a gust. Their eyes, hollow and mournful, pleaded silently for release. Thomas's breath hitched as he forced himself to meet their gaze, drawing strength from their collective suffering. "I won't let you suffer here any longer," he whispered, voice trembling but resolute. The hotel responded with a low, guttural groan, the floor beneath his feet seeming to ripple like a disturbed pond. Shadows stretched and recoiled, tendrils of darkness reaching out as if to snatch him away. But Thomas planted his feet firmly, raising the photograph high. The image began to glow faintly, a pale blue light emanating from the paper itself, illuminating the peeling paint and warped wood around him. A sudden rush of wind tore through the hall, carrying with it the scent of salt and old wood, and the anguished whispers of the trapped souls crescendoed into a haunting chorus. Light burst forth from the photograph, flooding the room with an ethereal glow that pushed back the encroaching darkness. The ghostly figures began to shimmer, their forms becoming less distinct as they slowly dissolved into the mist, their faces relaxing into expressions of peace. Tears streamed down Thomas's face as he watched them fade, the weight on his soul lifting ever so slightly. But the victory was not without cost. His legs buckled, sending him crashing to the floor, sweat mingling with the cold tears on his cheeks. His chest heaved as he fought to catch his breath, the hotel's silence returning in full force, oppressive and heavy like a shroud. Through the haze of exhaustion, Thomas felt the lingering presence of the curse, a stubborn specter refusing to be fully vanquished. The hotel's shadow flickered in the distance, its dark silhouette warped and trembling against the swirling mist outside. A faint whisper echoed through the corridors, a mournful lament that chilled him to the bone. He struggled to his feet, every muscle protesting, his mind racing with the knowledge that the battle was far from over. The curse had been weakened, yes, but it still pulsed with a malevolent life, waiting for the next soul to ensnare. Thomas knew that exposing the hotel's secrets to the world was only the beginning. As he staggered towards the exit, the photograph fluttered from his grasp, landing on the cracked floorboards. The faint blue glow pulsed once more before fading into darkness, a silent promise that the souls freed today were not alone in their suffering. Outside, the dawn was beginning to break, casting pale light over the misty shoreline. Thomas paused for a moment, the salty air filling his lungs, mingling with the taste of iron and fear. He was scarred and broken, but alive, and for the first time in months, hope flickered within him, fragile but real. Yet, as he glanced back at the looming silhouette of the hotel, he knew the shadows it cast would haunt him forever. The curse's grip had been challenged, but it endured, an unyielding testament to the power of memory, loss, and the darkest corners of the human soul. With resolve hardening in his chest, Thomas stepped into the light of the new day, ready to face whatever lingering darkness awaited him. The fight was not over, but he would face it head-on, armed with the truth and the unbreakable will to see the lost souls finally at peace. But deep within the hotel's fading walls, the cursed presence stirred, a whisper on the wind promising that the nightmare was far from finished. Thomas Graves gasped for air as he pushed through the warped doorway, stumbling onto the cold and even ground beyond the hotel's threshold. The mist clung thick and heavy, swirling in eddies around his feet, cold and damp against his worn shoes. The salty tang of the sea filled his nostrils, sharp and bracing after the stale, suffocating atmosphere inside the hotel. He coughed violently, clutching his side where bruises bloomed beneath his worn jacket. The lingering pain a stark reminder of the ordeal he had just survived. The sky was a pale wash of grays and muted golds, the first tentative light of dawn breaking over the horizon. Thomas's breath formed ragged clouds as he exhaled, the chill of the morning seeping into his bones. Somewhere above, a gull cried out, its lonely call echoing over the restless surf, a haunting soundtrack to his battered emergence. For a moment, he simply stood there, unsteady, the cold wind tugging at his dark hair and scruff-covered face. His eyes fixed on the shifting silhouette of the hotel behind him. It was a ghostly vision, fading at the edges in the dense fog that wrapped the shore like a shroud. The building seemed less a structure now than a living entity, breathing softly in the mist, its windows dark and hollow like the eyes of a hollowed skull. The silence around it was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic crash of waves and the distant, intermittent cries of seabirds. Thomas's hands trembled as he reached up, wiping grime and spectral residue from his brow. His fingers shook, not just from cold but from the weight of exhaustion, and something deeper, an invisible scar etched deeply into his soul. He could still feel the hotel's grasp lingering, a cold pressure at the base of his neck, the whisper of lost voices circling just beyond hearing. The memories twisted in his mind, mingling with his own grief, threatening to pull him back into the nightmare he had fought so hard to escape. Yet, standing there on the misty shoreline, Thomas felt a fragile spark of hope kindle within him. He pulled the battered notebook from his coat pocket, the pages dog-eared and stained, each word a testament to his relentless pursuit of truth. His fingers, stained with ink and dirt, moved almost automatically as he began jotting down the fragmented revelations, the curse's nature, the hotel's cursed grasp on nostalgia and despair, the stories of the lost souls trapped within its spectral walls. His voice, hoarse and low, whispered against the crashing waves, fragments of thoughts and memories, a litany of warnings and truths that he vowed to share. The hotel might still stand on the horizon, a silent sentinel cloaked in mist and sorrow, but Thomas was no longer a prisoner to its curse. He was a witness, a bearer of stories that might yet break the cycle. But doubt gnawed at him relentlessly. Could his escape sever the malevolent ties that bound the hotel to the town's dark past? Or was the curse a shadow that would forever trail him, lurking just beyond the edge of vision? The weight of uncertainty pressed down as heavily as the salt-laden air. As dawn deepened, the town began to stir, the normal rhythms of life unfurling beneath the watchful gaze of the hotel. Thomas tucked his notebook away, pulling his collar tight against the chill. His eyes lingered once more on the spectral edifice, its presence a haunting echo in the distance. With slow, deliberate steps, he turned toward the town, each footfall a promise to uncover, to reveal, and to confront the lingering power of memory and loss that gripped the coastal community. The path ahead was uncertain, shadowed by grief and fear, but Thomas Graves carried with him the fragile light of understanding, the hope that even in the darkest corners, truth might yet hold sway. The hotel loomed silently behind him, a faded shadow in the mist, its curse unresolved but challenged. And as the waves whispered against the shore, Thomas's journey continued, a solitary figure haunted but unbroken, determined to reclaim the lost and break the silence once and for all. The town was quieter now. The relentless tide of disappearances that had darkened the coastal community's spirit for so long had finally ebbed away. Where once there had been whispered fears and furtive glances toward the distant horizon, now there was cautious breathing space, fragile, tentative, yet unmistakably present. Thomas Graves stood at the center of this uneasy calm, his figure silhouetted against the pale dawn. The mist still clung to the shoreline, wrapping the world in a cool, damp embrace, as if reluctant to let go of the secrets it had held for decades. Inside the town library, Evelyn Marsh and Detective Mark Halstead sat side by side at a heavy oak table, the flickering candlelight casting dancing shadows upon the walls lined with dusty tomes. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and faint salt from the sea breeze that slipped through a cracked window. Between them lay Thomas' meticulously kept notes, photographs, journal entries, and fragments of half-remembered legends, each piece a thread in the tapestry of the town's haunted past. Evelyn adjusted her glasses, her gaze steady yet heavy with the weight of what they had uncovered. "It's almost overwhelming to think how much suffering this place has borne," she murmured, tracing a finger along a faded photograph of the hotel. "So many lives swallowed by that place." Halstead folded his arms, a crease of skepticism softening his otherwise pragmatic features. "I never thought I'd find myself entertaining the supernatural, but the evidence speaks for itself. Something unnatural was at work here." And yet, Evelyn added quietly, It's the human element that ties it all together. Despair, loss, the inability to let go. The hotel feeds on those emotions. Their conversation was interrupted by the soft creak of the library door opening. Thomas entered, his face drawn but resolute. "The disappearances have stopped," he said, voice low but carrying a spark of hope. Whatever the hotel was, its hold has weakened. Halstead nodded slowly. "Your confrontation with that cursed presence, it seems to have broken the cycle. But I can't shake the feeling that this isn't the end." Thomas took a seat, rubbing the back of his neck. The hotel is still there, just beyond the horizon, a silent sentinel. Even if the curse is broken, some part of it lingers. Outside, the town began to stir. In the town hall, a small gathering of residents exchanged guarded stories. They spoke of loss and survival, of nights haunted by dreams and whispers, and of the tentative peace that now allowed them to breathe without the constant shadow of fear. Their voices were soft but resolute, a chorus of healing amidst the scars left behind. At the police station, Halstead stepped out into the morning light. He looked toward the distant outline of the hotel, its faded silhouette barely visible through the haze. The building seemed less menacing now, more a relic of a forgotten nightmare than an active threat. Yet that ancient presence was etched into the very fabric of the town, a reminder of the thin veil that separated reality from the unknown. Thomas, meanwhile, walked the shoreline, the wet sand cool beneath his feet. The sea whispered its eternal song, a timeless lullaby that seemed to speak of endings and beginnings. His mind wandered back over the months of obsession, fear, and revelation. He had confronted horrors beyond human comprehension and emerged scarred but alive. The price had been high, his peace shattered, his soul marked by the shadows of the lost, but the truth was now laid bare. He paused, looking out over the water where the first rays of sunlight fractured the mist. Somewhere beyond that horizon, the hotel waited silent, watchful, perhaps dormant, but never gone. The photograph taken of him earlier that day, by an unknowing passerby, would capture that lingering presence. A faded spectre on the edge of the frame, a whisper of the past that refused to be silenced. As the town slowly healed, its people cautious yet hopeful, Thomas resolved to keep watch. The line between the rational and the supernatural had been crossed, and though the immediate threat had passed, the memory of the hotel and its cursed imagery would remain. Some stories, he knew, were never truly finished, they only waited for the next chapter to begin. And the photograph's whisper echoed on, a haunting melody of nostalgia and loss, urging vigilance for the shadows that might one day return. The room was suffused with a low, trembling light, the dying embers of a single candle casting long, flickering shadows on the peeling wallpaper. Thomas Graves sat hunched over a cluttered desk, his hands wrapped around a chipped mug of cold tea. The silence was thick, broken only by the occasional creak of the old floorboards beneath the weight of the coastal wind. Yet beneath the stillness, a faint murmur seemed to crawl at the edges of his hearing, a whispering chorus of voices half remembered, half imagined, echoing from the recesses of his mind. He closed his eyes, willing the images away, but the memories refused to retreat. Faces blurred in the fog of his thoughts, each one a fragment of loss and longing. The spectral hotel, with its peeling facade and endless corridors, lingered in his vision like a stain on his soul. He had escaped its physical grasp, but the shadows it cast stretched far beyond the crumbling walls. The knock at the door startled him. He started, blinking away the haze, before rising shakily to answer. Evelyn Marsh stood there, her presence a quiet beacon amid the storm inside him. Her eyes, sharp behind round glasses, softened with concern as she stepped inside. "Thomas," she said gently, "you can't carry this burden alone. The town may be healing, but you're still trapped somewhere else." He managed a weak smile, but the darkness in his eyes betrayed him. "I thought leaving the hotel meant leaving it all behind. But it's not so simple. It's like the past keeps clawing its way back." Evelyn moved closer, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. "You don't have to fight it alone. Remember, we rehear. The stories, the memories, they re-heavy, but they don't have to suffocate you. Later that evening, Detective Mark Halstead appeared unexpectedly at the small cafe where Thomas had sought refuge. The rain tapped steadily against the window pane as the two men sat across from each other, the air thick with unspoken words. "You're not the only one who's been changed by this," Halstead admitted, voice low. "It's easy to get lost chasing ghosts. But you've got to hold on to what's real." Thomas nodded, appreciating the rare moment of understanding from the pragmatic detective. "Sometimes I wonder if the real horror is what we carry inside us after the ghosts are gone." Outside, the sea murmured ceaselessly, its cold breath sweeping over the shoreline where Thomas often wandered at dusk. The fading light painted the sky in bruised purples and muted golds, and the old hotel stood like a silent sentinel on the horizon. He could almost hear the soft sighs of the lost souls, their stories blending with the crashing waves. In these moments, Thomas felt the weight of nostalgia's cruel embrace, the yearning for what was, the despair for what could never be reclaimed. It was a delicate, dangerous balance between remembering and being consumed. Despite the town's tentative steps toward healing, Thomas remained adrift in a sea of memories and half-forgotten fears. His obsession had carved a chasm between himself and those who cared, isolation wrapping around him like a shroud. Yet somewhere beneath the despair, a fragile thread of hope persisted, fragile but unbroken. It whispered that perhaps, in time, the shadows would recede, and he could find his way back to the light. But for now, the lingering shadows held him tight, and the photograph's silent whisper echoed ever onward, reminding him that some pasts refused to fade quietly into night. As the candle sputtered and died, Thomas stared out into the gathering darkness, the hotel's faint silhouette etched forever into the horizon of his soul, a haunting echo of all he had lost and all he must yet face. The night deepened, and with it, the restless stirrings of memory and shadow, promising that the story was far from over. The early morning air was crisp and biting as Thomas made his way down the narrow path that led to the shoreline. The sea stretched before him, a vast expanse of restless grey waters lapping gently at the sand, while a thick mist curled like ghostly fingers along the beach. His boots pressed into the damp earth, leaving faint impressions that the tide would soon erase. Ahead, barely discernible through the haze, the hotel stood as it always had, an ancient, crumbling silhouette etched against the pale light of dawn. It was a silent sentinel, watching over the town and the secrets it harbored. Thomas paused at the edge of the water, the chill of the salt air stinging his cheeks. His breath came out in soft plumes, mingling with the mist as he looked up at the fading outline of the building. The hotel had become more than a structure. It was a symbol, a repository of sorrow and memories, a place where time seemed to twist and fold back upon itself. Despite everything the horrors uncovered, the lost souls glimpsed within its walls, the despair it fed upon the hotel remained, quietly enduring, a spectral presence that refused to be forgotten. He knelt down beside a shallow tide pool, its surface still and glassy, reflecting the muted sky above. As a sudden gust of wind swept across the shore, the fog flickered and shifted, revealing a fractured image of the hotel shimmering in the water. The reflection wavered and fractured like a broken mirror, each shard echoing stories of those who had vanished, their faces blurred and indistinct, but haunting nonetheless. For a moment, Thomas felt as if the whispers of the lost souls reached out to him across the divide, their voices carried on the surf and wind. Memories flooded his mind, the frightened eyes of Sarah Whitman as she clutched the last photograph of her brother. Evelyn Marsh's quiet warnings about the past the town wished to bury, the skeptical yet increasingly unsettled gaze of Detective Halstead. And always the hotel looming in the background, a silent witness to each tragedy. Thomas's fingers brushed against a piece of driftwood half buried in the sand, its surface rough and worn smooth in places by the relentless tides. He traced the grain absently, grounding himself in the tactile reality of the moment. Even as his thoughts spiraled through the tangled web of grief and horror that had consumed so much of his life in recent weeks, he thought of the original owner, the despair that had birthed the curse, and the souls trapped in limbo, caught between worlds by the insidious pull of nostalgia and loss. The cries of gulls echoed overhead, sharp and plaintive, mingling with the faintest of murmurs, ghostly voices carried faintly on the wind. As if the hotel itself breathed in the breath of the sea and whispered secrets to those who dared listen. Thomas closed his eyes, the sound wrapping around him, a melancholic lullaby that spoke of sorrow too deep for words. When he opened them again, the light had changed. The pale hues of dawn were giving way to the stronger glow of morning, and the hotel's outline began to dissolve back into the mist. The building seemed to dissolve, its edges blurring until it became little more than a shadow on the horizon, a part of the sky and sea, a fragment of a dream just out of reach. Thomas stood slowly, the weight of what he had seen pressing down on him like the damp, salt air. The hotel, for all its menace and mystery, was still here unchanged, unyielding, an eternal monument to the past's inescapable grasp. Yet in that quiet moment, a somber resolve took root within him. He would carry the story forward, bear witness to the lost souls, and fight to break the cycle even if the hotel's silent sentinel watched on, waiting for the next shadow to fade into its depths. A faint breeze stirred the mist once more, and Thomas turned away from the shoreline, the echo of the hotel lingering in his mind like a distant, mournful song. The battle was far from over, but for now, the dawn had come, and with it, a fragile hope that the darkness might one day be lifted. The evening sky was a muted wash of purples and grays, the kind of twilight that seemed to stretch endlessly over the restless sea. Thomas Graves stood on the jagged shoreline, the grit of sand and salt air clinging to his skin. His gaze was fixed on the distant silhouette that had haunted his every waking thought for weeks the faded, decrepit hotel perched at the edge of the horizon like a sentinel between worlds. The once grand building was now little more than a ghostly outline, its windows dark and hollow, its facade crumbling beneath layers of mist and time. Yet despite its decay, the hotel seemed to pulse with a quiet malevolence, an ancient presence that refused to be forgotten. Thomas felt the weight of countless lost souls pressing upon him, their silent cries carried on the wind. Behind him, the town was beginning to stir with cautious life. The disappearances had ceased, a fragile peace settling over the coastal community. Evelyn Marsh and Detective Mark Halstead watched from a respectful distance, their expressions a mixture of relief and lingering wariness. Evelyn's eyes, often so guarded, held a glimmer of hope, tempered by the knowledge that some wounds ran deeper than time could heal. Halstead, ever pragmatic, nodded thoughtfully, though the shadows beneath his eyes betrayed a battle fought within his own beliefs. Thomas's journey had been one of relentless obsession, a descent into a nightmare woven from nostalgia and despair. He had stared into the abyss of the hotel's cursed domain and emerged altered, haunted, yet unbroken. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the strap of his worn satchel, the weight of his notes and photographs a tangible reminder of the horrors he had witnessed. As he turned to leave the shoreline, a figure approached from the nearby promenade, a tourist, oblivious to the dark history etched into the very air of the town. The stranger raised a camera, its lens catching the last light of day, and snapped a candid photograph of Thomas. The shutter's soft click echoed briefly, swallowed quickly by the sea breeze. Unaware of the significance, the passerby moved on, leaving Thomas alone once more beneath the gathering night. But in that fleeting moment, the camera had captured more than a weary man standing by the sea. It had captured the faint, spectral presence of the hotel behind him, a whisper of the curse that lingered still. Later, as the photograph was developed and examined in a dim hotel room far away, the image revealed a haunting detail. The hotel's ghost-like outline shimmered faintly in the background, a silent testament to the enduring power of memory and loss. It was a chilling reminder that some shadows never truly fade. Thomas sat alone, the photograph in his trembling hands. The faces of the lost, the echo of their stories, and the hotel's spectral grasp weighed heavily on his soul. Though the disappearances had ended, the curse remained a subtle, insidious force woven into the fabric of the town and the lives it touched. He knew as the cool night air brushed against his skin that the past was not dead. It was alive, lurking just beyond the veil of reality, waiting patiently in the fading light. And as long as the hotel stood, even faint and forgotten on the horizon, the whisper of its curse would endure, a somber echo of nostalgia's cruel hold. With a final, wary breath, Thomas folded the photograph carefully and placed it among his notes. His eyes returned once more to the distant silhouette, the silent sentinel watching over the sea, and the lost souls that lingered within its walls. The story was far from over, and the photographer's whisper was a warning no one could yet hear. As the first stars began to pierce the twilight sky, Thomas turned away from the shore, stepping slowly back toward the town a man forever changed, carrying the weight of the hotel's dark legacy and the knowledge that some curses never truly die. But somewhere in the distance, the hotel waited, its faded walls cloaked in mist, its dark windows watching, always watching. The past had spoken, and it was not finished.